I am an alternate member for TPB for Charles County. We have a fairly lengthy agenda today, so we're going to want to keep moving as always. For those of you who are new to this meeting format, just a reminder that we want everybody to stay on mute unless you are speaking or you've been called upon to ask a question or make a comment. We generally do this, so I'll ask, are there any comments or questions from, let's say, Maryland? I'll do the same for Virginia, and then MATA or other mobile agencies. So please wait for your category to be called to speak. If you have a burning question and you don't want to forget, you can always put your question or comment in the chat box, and both the speaker and the staff and team will see it, as well as myself, and we can call upon you for that if it's a question. Like I said, we do try to keep things moving. So I'm certainly not trying to be rude, but if we say, let's move on, or we mention the time or something like that, it's not to be rude. It's just to keep things moving. And then for those watching who are not members of the committee, this is cast on YouTube for your own pleasure. And again, if you in the audience have a question outside of the team, you can always email staff and they will respond to you as quickly as they can. So with that, our first item is our roll call. So Lynn, would you take the roll call?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason. So I'm going to state the jurisdiction or agency, and if you could state your name, I'd appreciate it. Apologize if I go too fast. I'll be monitoring the participant list and try to capture you that way. So starting with DC, District Department of Transportation.
Mark Rawlings is present.
Good morning. DCOP.
Kristen's here.
Good morning. On to Maryland. I'm going to say Jason's here because I see him. Frederick County.
Yep.
Frederick County. City of Frederick. City of Gaithersburg. We do have a new member, by the way, so we just added Rob Robinson to our list. Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Montgomery County. Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission, Prince George's County. The MDOT family, including SHA and MTA.
Good morning. Carrie Snyder is here.
Good morning. Anyone else? Okay, moving on. Montgomery County.
Yeah, Gary Rich is here. Good morning.
Good morning. Prince George's County.
Good morning. Vic Weisberg here.
Hello. City of Rockville.
Morning. Emma Chaffee's here.
Good morning. Tacoma Park. Moving on to Virginia, Alexandria.
Jen Schlesinger's here.
Oh, good. There you are. Thanks, Jen. Arlington County.
Hello, Dan Malif is here.
Hi, Dan. City of Fairfax. Fairfax County.
Good morning. Malcolm Watson is here.
Good morning. Falls Church. Fauquier County. Loudoun County.
Good morning, Bob Brown here.
Good morning. City of Manassas.
Good morning. Chloe Lelome is here.
Good morning. NVPD. NVTA.
Good morning, Sri here.
Good morning, Sri. NVTC. Keep an eye out for Dan. Prince William County.
Good morning, Megan Landis here.
Good morning. PRTC.
Good morning, Betsy's here.
Great, thanks, Betsy. VDOA. Virginia Department of Transportation.
Norman, Regina, and Maria are here.
Great, thanks. We got them all. VDRPT.
Good morning, Scotta here.
Good morning. VRE. Christine, I'll keep an eye out for her. WMATA.
Good morning, Marcus here.
Hello. All right, federal and other administrations, Federal Highway Administration. I know Sandra is on vacation until the 13th, so I'm guessing she's not here. Dan Koenig. Are you here? National Capital Planning Commission. National Park Service.
Yes, Laurel's here.
Hello, Laurel.
Hi.
Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. And Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee. Okay, great. That concludes roll call. Again, I will monitor the participant list. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, so our next item is the approval of the meeting recap from June 4th of the technical committee. Are there any comments or questions on the meeting recap from any jurisdiction? Okay, I'm not hearing any, so we will accept those as final. And moving on to the juicy topic of, I'd say, the last 2 months. And that is the recap of the TPB meeting, the last TPB meeting, I believe it was June 16th. And that would be Mr. Shrikant.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all. I am happy to report and recap the June 16th meeting. I say happy because I have to thank all of you, those who are in this meeting, and those within your agencies who may not be in this meeting, but who nevertheless, over the past, going as far back as 12 months at least, had been working on this plan update and the development of a new tip. This was a very thorough review of all of the projects, the project description sheets, lots of new questions added. We moved to a new database. Lots of things were happening all at the same time. Financial plan, many of you have been working on it for more than a year now. And making projections during this particular disruption to way of living and the economy due to the pandemic has all been challenging, but all of that work really came through. The positive development of the June 16th meeting is that the TPB approved the conformity inputs. And I will speak to the resolution in just a minute, but I just wanted to start with that positive acknowledgement. And there were other things that came out of the June 16th meeting, and I will get into that at a very high level. So in your meeting packet, there was a copy of the resolution that was adopted on June 16th. There are two parts to the resolution, meaning there are two resolved clauses. The first resolved clause pertains to the conformity inputs that were approved, and the second resolved clause is related more to the long-range plan development and the TIP development and the updating of the Metropolitan Long-Range Plan. So I will quickly review the second resolved clause, or what was being referred to as Part B during the TPB June 16th meeting. I will start with that because it will be brief, because all I can say is you have read the resolution. The resolution says that after we complete the 2022 federally mandated quadrennial update, we will do an interim update again in 2024. And the resolution says that that update will have two features. One, it will be informed through some scenario analysis. There have been many scenario analysis that the TPB has done over the past years and decades, and we can do some more. You can never have enough learning, I suppose. So we will do some scenario analysis. That is one element of the 2024 update. And the second element is many of you on this committee who have been working on plan updates for a long time, the general assumption has been with every update of the plan, we generally start with an assumption that the projects that are already in the plan will continue to remain in the plan. That's an assumption. The agencies have always had the opportunity to drop projects that have been in the plan or make changes by keeping the plan, but make changes, maybe push them farther out into the future, or maybe change the limits or things like that. And then, of course, the agencies have always had the opportunity to add new projects. The 2024 update, as the TPB envisions it, will not make any assumptions on the projects that are already in the plan, meaning we are being asked to look at the long-range transportation plan of the region as having 0 projects, no projects at all. So it's a clean slate. So every agency, highway and transit agency, will be asked to look at, okay, you have a period of 21 years from 2024 to 2045, and you know what the transportation system is right now, you know what the demands are from the 2024 update. Provide your list of projects that you envision implementing, funding, implementing, operating, and maintaining over the next 21 years. So that is what that zero-based budgeting phraseology in Part B means. So that is what is in Part B. This TPB staff at the staff part, to be candid, we have not given any thought to how and when, what process, what schedule will be using, because we are currently in a plan update that's federally required that hasn't even begun yet or has just begun. And this update has a lot of new elements that we had already planned. So we want to make sure that this process gets on a way where it is proceeding as smoothly as it can to follow the schedule and make sure that it is ready to be adopted by June or July of next year. But staff will be turning its attention to this part of the resolution later on towards the end of this year. We will give it some thought. We will have to budget. We will have to look at what funding would be available, what staff resources would be available, what staff resources will need to be augmented, what is the process. There will be a lot of thought given to how to execute this work activity. And as always, the tech committee will be involved, you will be briefed, your input will be sought. So just keep that in mind. So that is Part B of the resolution. So now we'll go to Part A, which is where I see the positive development. Conformity inputs were approved. Part of the conformity inputs was the cooperative forecast. Cooperative forecast 9.2. Many of your planning directors and their staffs had worked on developing 9.2. That's been approved. So we'll be using that. The scope of work for conducting the conformity analysis was approved, so that would mean we would use the latest, not just cooperative forecast, but the travel demand model. We'll be using MOVES 2014B. We will be using all of the operational restrictions. So all of that, all of which are information that's coming from all of you. So that's been approved. The third part that was approved as part of the conformity inputs is the list of projects. As I reported to the board, there are about 617 line items that were approved. I say line items because not each of those 6 line item is a project by itself, right? Oftentimes a single project gets broken down into 3 or 4 or 5 line items because the number of lanes is different, or the year of completion is different, or something is different. So in essence, there are 617 project segments, if you were to call it as such. So those were submitted for the TPB, but a whole bunch of them, I didn't count the number of segments, but there was the Maryland express lanes, hot lanes project on 495 and 270, that was not approved. So the TPB approved all the projects that you all had submitted except for the Maryland express lane hot lanes project on 495 and 270. So what staff has done is, with the approval of the rest, we have begun the work, the conformity work. The reason it takes 9 months for us to do is there is almost 3 months worth of preparatory work that staff has to do. All of the networks, and there are multiple years, 5 to 6 different years of network that we have to create. We have to create a highway network, we have to create a transit network, make sure that the thousands and thousands of links are all correctly coded, there are no errors. And then we have to take the cooperative forecast, which is done at a regional level, and reduce it down to the 3,722 transportation analysis zones, the TAZs. That work has to happen. So all of that work has to happen. So we have begun that work with the network coding, and a lot of parallel things are happening. So that is why the June action was important, because all of this work needs to happen. And the conformity schedule that the TPB adopted last December has the results of the conformity analysis being ready by March of next year, so that then it can go through the public review and public comments, and then TPB can approve it in June. So that work has begun, so I'm glad to report that. Now, since that meeting, since June 16th meeting, and I'm sure you have read about this in the newspapers, there has probably been multiple discussions within your individual agency and maybe in some of the sub-regional forums. And that is the topic of the project that was removed. That's the Maryland Express Lanes Hot Lanes project. It came down to a weighted vote. There wasn't a clear majority consensus. So there was a request for a weighted vote. And the weighted vote, as you all know, is where every TPB member who is present and casting a vote is weighed by the population of the jurisdiction that they represent. So based on that weighted vote, the project was removed. So since then, I would like to report a couple of developments that have happened, and you all should have received an email that I sent to the TPB members late yesterday afternoon. And that provides some background and details of the developments that have happened since the June 16th meeting. In summary, the developments, I look at the developments as in 2 phases. The first development was on June 21st. Maryland Department of Transportation wrote to the TPB that, hey, on June 16th, the TPB removed this public-private partnership project that was in the plan from proceeding either into conformity or eventually into the plan. But what that action did was it removed about $6 billion in revenue that we had assumed. So the list of projects that MDOT had submitted, which were approved on June 16th, except for the Hot Lanes project, is no longer fiscally constrained, because some of that $6 billion that we had assumed coming from the private sector, yes, a majority of that was going to build the new lanes and new interchanges and acquiring right-of-way and all of that stuff. But about $1.5 billion of that $6 billion was going to rebuilding the American Legion Bridge and maintaining that bridge between now and 2045. Without that project and without that $6 billion in private sector money, now the state of Maryland has to pay for rebuilding the American Legion Bridge and maintaining it for 2045 through 2045. And that is estimated to cost $1.5 billion. That private sector money that would have paid for that, we don't have that now. when we had assumed private sector money would be there, we used $1.5 billion of state funds to fund other highway and transit projects that the TPB approved. Now, without that money, we now don't have the ability to fund some of those projects. So please, therefore, TPB, you will have to amend the list of MDOT projects that was approved on June 16th to reflect removing some projects that will, in essence, add up to $1.5 billion. That's the gist of their 21st letter. So we have started the network coding work. We now understand, based on the June 16th action, some of the Maryland DOT projects, whether they're highway or transit, that was approved on June 16th will probably now have to be removed. So rather than starting our network coding work with MDOT projects or with Maryland projects, we are proceeding with Virginia and DC. Work continues because we can't afford to lose time. So we now await a TPB action to revise the Maryland projects that were approved on June 16th. I say Maryland, but it's really MDOT list of projects. So that is the first development that has happened. And we briefed the TPB officers and we spoke with MDOT. We tried to look through all of the financial information that was submitted by MDOT for all of their projects. Working through all of that with MDOT, we have a list of projects, MDOT submitted projects, and the cost estimates for each of those projects. We developed that list. Normally, we would have developed it 6 months later, but we had to expedite that work. We developed the MDOT list, made sure that the financial information in the CLR, in the TIP database matched the financial information MDOT had. So that list was provided back to MDOT, and we have asked MDOT to identify before the July 21st meeting what projects they would propose be now removed to make up for the $1.5 billion of lost revenue. So the staff recommendation to the TPB will be at their July meeting. The TPB can review the proposed list of projects that MDOT is proposing to delete or maybe downgrade to a study, and issue that as a notice that TPB will be modifying the list of projects that it approved on June 16th, and that modification will be removing or downgrading these projects. So issue a notice in the July meeting and to convene a special brief short meeting in August where they can come back and approve those projects. So that is the game plan on the MDOT 21st letter. Yes, on July 7th, MDOT sent us a letter that said, hey, look, when we look at the list of projects, we have projects that go from 2021 all the way to 2045. But the $1.5 billion that we will need to come from projects with a completion date of 2035 or earlier. So dropping a project that had a completion date of 2040 will not help us reestablish the fiscal constraint because the bridge needs to be rehabbed and rebuilt before 2035. So from the master list of MDOT projects in their July 7th letter, MDOT has identified a subset of projects with a completion date no later than 2035 and said, this is the universe of projects that we are looking at. And from this universe of projects, we will identify a limited set of projects that we propose to drop. And that the universe of projects right now adds up to $2.8 billion. But MDOT, I understand, is looking for projects that add up to $1.5 billion. So we are expecting MDOT to provide that revised list in time for the TPB meeting materials mail out on July 15th. So that will be in the TPB mail out. So this is one development all related to the MDOT 21st letter. On a parallel track almost, but related to the MDOT 21st letter, a few Maryland jurisdictions have notified TPB staff and MDOT and MDOT has also notified TPB staff that the information that removing the project has now impacted the construction and operations and implementation of other projects that the TPB approved is new information. That information was not available on June 16th when some of us voted to remove the project. We now want to revisit that. We want the TPB to consider either amending their June 16th action or a new action to add the Heartlands project back. The thinking there appears to be, if we add the project back, the $1.5 billion in revenue will be restored. And with that restoration, these other projects would not have to be dropped. So that is the request we have received. VDOT wrote a letter asking for TPB to revisit that action. MDOT wrote a letter asking for TPB to revisit that action and to add the project back. Late yesterday, we got a letter from City of Gaithersburg that have asked. So that is another action that staff will propose be included on the July 21st TPB agenda. So the TPB can consider that and they can take another vote. If the vote adds the project back in, then the money is restored, then we wouldn't have to give notice of deleting these projects. If the project is not added, the same outcome of June 16th prevails in the July meeting, then TPB will proceed with having a discussion of the projects to be dropped, give a notice, come back in August. So that's what has happened, and that's a quick high-level overview of where we are on this. With that, Mr. Chairman, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Kanti. Thanks very much. Obviously, a complicated topic and one that there's consternation over. With that said, let's start with Maryland. Are there any comments or questions from Maryland?
Yes, of course. Thank you. I think it was a very good explanation, Kanti, but there's one piece that's missing, is that you can delay a project on that list beyond 2035 to 2045, and a project in 2045 may be able to be dropped. So it's not a comprehensive review of projects. And for instance, there could be a project, let's just say in Montgomery County, the Corridor Cities Transitway, a transit project. So one of the projects is like $250 or $260 million for that, up through 2035. But what if that project ended up in 2040 or 2045 and a interchange project came out in 2045? So I think it's an incomplete analysis because there can be substitutions after 2035. And I think you're missing that whole parts of the discussion. Frederick County, Prince George's County, those projects can remain. It's just something else has to leave after 2035 and can be substituted. So I think that that's a piece of work that needs to be done. The second is I request that you would send everybody on TPB, make available the list that you provided to MDOT for their beginning of their analysis on the fiscal constraint, so that we all know the projects that you sent to them and the fiscal constraint element and the amount of money that's in the current CLRP and the proposed one. That would be very helpful, so we see what the complete list is. But again, there's going to be substitutions. You don't need to use the list that was submitted. that list can substitute and be moved. So important projects in Prince George's County and Frederick County can still move forward, but it just means something else down the road may have to give. And maybe Montgomery County has projects that could give so that the money could be available to Frederick and Prince George's County of other interchanges that we may want to postpone or eliminate. So I think it's a very complicated discussion. It's not very simple. And we need the base information that you gave to MDOT so that we can begin to look at some of those scenarios. Thank you.
Okay, Gary, on your second point, easily done. The comprehensive list of projects and their final cost. We would be developing that for all of the projects from Maryland, DC, Virginia, Vermont, everybody. But what we had to expedite and do for MDOT, we'll be happy to share with TPB and the tech committee, no problem. On your first point, all of those are valid, but that is not for me or any of the TPB staff to get involved in making your programming decisions. When I say your, that's not for TPB staff to say how MDOT should program their projects. Just like how it would not be for TPB staff to develop WMATA's capital program, right? So
I'm 100% in agreement. I'm just saying is that you were saying that these were the choices and options. And I'm trying to say there is another one. The other one is to substitute, keep these really important high priority projects in the plan, but take something that isn't so high priority that's in 2045 and 2040 and remove that.
Absolutely.
So it's more complicated.
Absolutely. And that is exactly why staff is recommending to the TPB not to act on the MDOT's proposal in July, rather to give notice that these are the projects under consideration, that these will be dropped, and then come back in August so that there can be time provided for those discussions to be had by MDOT. I'm assuming that, as with any state agency, that there are conversations happening at the state level, especially on projects where there are shared funding. You know, if there are projects entirely funded by a state agency, that's a different thing. But particularly if there are projects with shared funding. So anyway, I don't disagree that there are MDOT has options. I just don't know what their process will be to finalize the list. All I'm reporting is what I have received from MDOT as to these are the universe of projects that they are considering.
Thank you.
Jason,
Thank you.
We're still with Maryland, so that's fine.
Hi, this is Vic Weisberg. Just sort of following up on Gary's points. I agree that, and I agree with Conti's analysis that, you know, we need to look at all of the options, including substitutions. The other and frankly, not to just lock in on the list that was provided. Furthermore, I'd like to really better understand what the financial constraints truly are. You know, what would need to be offset. I understand that the $6 billion figure is really more like $1.5 billion. The list of projects that were submitted total up to well over $2 billion, 1.6 billion, which is over the 1.5, are just the projects that are being suggested to come out from Prince George's County. So we'd really like to have a better understanding of what the true needs and true numbers actually are. Thanks.
And now MDOT is on the line. If they want to respond, all I can do is recap the math as I understand it from the letters MDOT has written. Of the $6 billion, about $4.5 billion would have gone for constructing the new lanes, new interchanges, and all of that. You remove the project, those expenses are removed, and those revenues are removed. So one can say the books are balanced. But about 1.5 billion of the 6 billion is estimated to be the actual cost of rebuilding American Legion Bridge and maintaining it between now and 2045. That estimate, if the project is no longer being funded through public-private partnership, the rebuilding of the bridge and maintaining it still has to happen. That has to come from MDOT's budgets, which now they have to find. They have to come up with $1.5 billion. And what they are saying, because they are not able to increase revenues, they don't have an identified approved source of additional revenue, the only thing they can do is cut some expenses back. And they want to cut about $1.5 billion in projected expenses. To get to that 1.5 billion, they have identified a larger set of projects, which adds up to 2.8. They are yet to make a selection from that $2.8 billion worth of projects, a set of projects that will add up to 1.5. That is how I understand the two letters, but MDOT is on the line and I will defer to them.
Yeah, hey, good morning. This is Carrie Snyder with MDOT. Gary and Vic, I definitely see your points about the changing projects in before 2035 to post 2035. That is certainly something, a consideration that we can discuss. And Vic, to your point about the universe of projects, we wanted to put out a list of potentials of where this list of where the cuts or the downgrades could come from. And then I was going to be reaching out to you guys to schedule some time for us to talk and walk through the different scenarios of how we could get to that sometime on Monday or maybe this afternoon if you're available. So the letter went out the 7th, late 7th on the 7th, and it's been sent around by me and by Conti to the members of TPB. So we wanted to give time for people to digest that and then come back to you guys for input on the things that are in that list. And for the financial constraint piece, the cost estimate for the American Legion Bridge and the associated system preservation benefits, those cost estimates have come from the managed lane study and the assumptions that went into that NEPA process for the associated infrastructure that was going to be included with the hot lanes project. And so we could discuss that in greater detail too. But that 1.5 is an estimate that comes from the development of the NEPA, and I think that was posted back in July of 2020 when the draft EIS was updated. So I will certainly be reaching out to you guys to schedule some time to talk about it on Monday.
Okay, thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments from Maryland jurisdictions? Okay, I see some hands up from Virginia, so let's go to Virginia jurisdictions.
Yeah, thank you. This is Norman Whitaker from VDOT. Just wanted to make one comment on the zero-based planning concept for 2024. It's our understanding from the resolution that projects that have been funded are exempt from that zero base concept. Give you an example: if we've purchased right away or made substantial expenditures on a project and then we don't do it, eventually, if federal funds are involved, we have to pay that back. So I know many MPO plans have a concept where they start with committed projects as a given, meaning funding is committed to the projects and they're in the plan and they stay there. I don't think it would be a reasonable way to do business if the TPB approves projects and later changes their mind 4 years down the road after substantial expenditures have been made based on reliance on that approval. And this is something that doesn't come up for another couple of years when we're developing the 2024 plan, but we just wanted to make it clear. Our understanding is projects that have been funded will not be subject to the zero-based concept.
Yeah, Norman, I can confirm that is part of the language in the resolution for Part B.
Thank you, Conti.
All right, thanks, Norman. Sarah Williams, you had your hand up.
Yes, it's not necessarily a question, more of a comment. So as you guys are aware, DRPT and MDOT completed the 495 American Legion Bridge Transit and TDM plan earlier this year that includes transit recommendations going over the American Legion Bridge. So I guess I'm just concerned what this could mean for those transit projects coming out of the plan if that project is removed.
Okay. I don't know if there's any response to that from staff or from MDOT, or if that's just kind of moot.
Nothing other than to acknowledge, yes, Sierra, that there are plans to operate express buses on those express lanes from Maryland to Virginia. And if that piece of the project is not added, then those transit services either may have to be deferred, or I don't know if there is any interest in retrying operating those buses on the shoulders on one side and coming back in the express lanes on the other side. But you're right. Thanks.
Thank you. Next hand up was Bob Brown.
Hey, good morning. Just took a sneak peek at the steering committee's meeting.
Hey,
Bob,
Bob,
we can't hear you.
Could you move closer
We
to your
can't hear you,
mic?
Bob.
Thank you. That better?
Yep.
Sorry, I was getting too comfortable. So I'm not a member of the steering committee, obviously, and I usually have a chance to listen in. And then the steering committee coming up after this meeting, there's a agenda for the July 21st Transportation Planning Board. And as everyone said this morning, it's complicated and there are a lot of things going, on. I see, I don't know, I see that this item is number 10 on the action item agenda right now as you're proposing. Again, I assume because I listened to the last one that Chair Allen is going to make some changes. I highly recommend, and I know my board would support this, that this moved up to the beginning of the meeting, and as much as possible that you could condense the beginning, the opening remarks, because you always put those in writing, and just give everybody as much time as possible again to have this discussion. Hopefully maybe things, I pray every night that it works out. So hopefully it'll be a very short discussion and things will be resolved before that. But anyways, as I said, I'm not a member of the steering committee, and I don't know how many people have looked ahead to see what the next agenda is for the Transportation Planning Board in July. But I just don't see, I see this being the top item, and give it as much time as possible. Even last time, it just went over the deadline. So thank you. That's the only comment I have on this.
Thank you, Bob. Your suggestions noted. That's exactly what staff did. In fact, there were other action items for the TPB. We have moved some of them to the steering committee to have the steering committee act on it. There is one action item of allocating American Rescue Plan Act ARPA funds for enhanced mobility. That is a very time sensitive one. The selection of those projects would not have happened by time of steering committee to act. So that is at least one action that the board has to take. We don't think it will take a lot of time or discussion. You'll probably be able to move quickly. And last board meeting, the board was supposed to approve the first set of roadway safety projects receiving grants. The TPB has said safety is a priority. They deferred it to this month. So we are hoping, once again, we don't believe that the selected recommended projects would be controversial or would require a lot of discussion. So those are the only two action items we have put ahead of this. But you're right that the chair and the vice chairs decide whether they want to defer those two actions either later in the meeting or to a subsequent meeting. If you're going to meet in August, if they want to come back in August, that's fine. I mean, not for the enhanced mobility is one that staff feels strongly, because these are organizations that are providing services and who are hurting financially because of the pandemic. So we want to get that money out to them as quickly as we can.
Just remember, I appreciate all that. Just remember that in the agenda right now, you have almost an hour before you even get to the action items. If at all possible, again, everything is in writing. You submit everyone does a great job, putting together their meeting notes. And if you could at just this one time, just again, it's up to Chair Allen. If just one time, pass saying, ask that everybody have any comments on those, please, please state them. Otherwise, we'll go directly into the action items.
Certainly. Thanks.
Thank you.
I can certainly stand up at the TPB meeting and say pass when it comes to my turn for committee reports. Let's see. Next person looking to make a question or comment was Maria.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So, Kanti, the question I have, and I thank you for the summary, that was very thorough, is what happens if we do have to come back in August, and by August timeframe, because of the constraint element of Maryland, and they have to decide on a new AQC list, and we are down to August, and there is still no consensus. I mean, can you speak a little bit? My concern, obviously, Virginia supports bringing back the American Legion Bridge through 495 and 270, and supports Maryland efforts for the entire project. And you have our letter, and everybody can review where we stand. But I'm just trying to think ahead. What happens if Maryland has to deal with reducing their financial plan and reducing their AQC list, and we have to come back in August and there's still no resolution? At that point, I'm concerned with the integrity of the plan itself and the timeline that it takes to have it certified for all of us, for the entire region. Can you touch base on that a little bit for everybody to understand what is at play here?
Thank you, Maria. So, yeah, you're right. So just to summarize the question or the concern behind the question is, staff has begun the network coding work. We will continue with everything, but the network coding will not be completed and actual work will not begin till the August meeting, special August meeting, where the MDOT projects will be finalized. So that has to happen. Even by waiting till August, the staff will have to revise the conformity schedule, push it back 1 month, meaning the TPB currently is scheduled to adopt the new plan and approve the conformity June of next year. By waiting till August, we will be proposing to move the TPB action to July, 1 month. We believe, and we have talked with Federal Highway and the FTA, that they will still have about 90 days after the TPB action in July to review all of our financial plan, conformity analysis, TIP, and everything, and approve the conformity analysis before December. They will have 90 days. If we don't have the MDOT projects finalized in August, then if we keep pushing this back by another month or more, then we will miss the December deadline. So it is a real concern. Just like how the board was advised that the June action is a must, we will be advising the board in July that by August, you have to make a decision, because delaying that beyond August into September, we would have gotten into a territory where we would not be able to say with any degree of certainty that the new plan and conformity will all be approved before December. So I appreciate you bringing it up. We will make sure that that point is made clear to the board.
Thank you. I just want to make sure everybody don't lose focus of the end game as to we must have a plan that is certified or else all of us will suffer. All of our transit payments, all of our projects, even paving, everything is tied to that constraint element of the plan. So I appreciate you bring that up. Also, the other thing I wanted to ask, and I know I've asked you this before, Kanti, is that explain, and I know it takes time, but maybe it might be worth your while. Explain at the beginning of the meeting the significance of the weighted vote and what happens if somebody abstains, what happens if somebody is vacant, and how does the weighted vote how those votes are distributed among other people that is voting. I think people didn't quite understood that the last time, so I think might be worth explaining a little bit of that up front. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just as a matter of housekeeping, if you had your hand up and you don't have any more questions, if you could please put it down so we don't confuse anybody. We were on Virginia jurisdictions. Are there any other comments or questions from Virginia jurisdictions? Not hearing any. How about DC? Okay, not hearing any. We heard a little bit from some of the DOTs, but are there any questions from the DOTs, WMATA, or other transportation agencies? All right, well, that moves us on to the next agenda topic, which is the ARPA applications received and the timeline for selection of those projects, as well as TPB approval. And that's Lynn Winchell-Mendy.
Good morning. I'm going to be very brief since we're a little bit behind schedule, but I'm happy to answer any questions. So I'm before you today to talk about the applications received under the ARPA solicitation, which is the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And this is the second stimulus that was awarded to the Enhanced Mobility Program. Next slide, please. And I'm going to skip that one as well. So the ARPA was signed into law on March 11th, 2021. It included $50 million for the Enhanced Mobility Program. For our region, we received $532,226, 100% federal for award. And the purpose of the funding is for prioritizing payroll and operational needs, but then also for whatever the purposes of enhanced mobility are, which is to increase mobility options and help older adults and people with disabilities get around our region. This is very similar to CRISA, which we had, I'd come before you previously, the only difference being 9 additional federal dollars, which I'm sure somebody will appreciate receiving. So again, the purpose of the funding is a priority for payroll and operations, and then also the option for vaccination transportation. Next slide. So we made this eligible to existing or recent enhanced mobility subrecipients, as well as former JARC and New Freedom subs. It had to be for the purpose of the existing enhanced mobility project or the one that was recently closed to support that project. Next slide. So our selection committee met July 6th and finalized recommendations July 7th. And we're working with the TPB chairs and the AFA chairs to receive their concurrence. Next slide. Selection criteria was the same. I'm not going to go through all this, but if anyone has any questions on it, it was the same as CRISA, which was adapted from our existing enhanced mobility criteria. Next slide. So we received 9 applications. The funding again was $532,226, and we received $1,169,333 in requests for funding. So at this point, I can't share the recommendations, but I can give you the basics. There were 2 types of applications: for transportation to vaccination sites, and then also to restart direct transportation services for older adults. One thing to keep in mind regarding the transportation to vaccination sites, there is a pre-award authority back to January 20th, 2020, and many of the agencies who applied have been already providing this service. Next slide. So we received 4 applications for transportation to vaccination sites, which would include paying for taxis to provide the transportation, and then also mobility management services to coordinate that transportation and the appointments. 2 from Maryland, 2 from Virginia. Next slide. And then the other type of applications received were to bring back furloughed workers or reinstate transportation programming that was suspended, direct transportation for older adults, people with disabilities. We received 5 applications, 1 from DC, 2 from Maryland, 2 from Virginia. And that was for things like driver salaries, fuel, preventive maintenance, and insurance. Next slide. So next steps are we're slated to go before the TPB on July 21st, as Conti mentioned. And once that approval, hopefully approval occurs and the TIP is amended, then we would go to notify the applicants of the status. Those who didn't receive funding on the program do have an opportunity to apply under existing 2020 Enhanced Mobility Solicitation, which is open now until September 1st. And I'll put a real quick plug in that there are 2 remaining pre-application conferences that are required to apply for Enhanced Mobility, and those are this month, July 13th and 19th. So if you haven't signed up and do want to apply, please do so. I think that's it. Then we would go to FTA for their approval process, which can take anywhere from 4 months on. That's it. Any other questions? I'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn, and thanks for making your presentation to the point and brief. That worked out really well. So with that, are there any questions or comments from Virginia jurisdictions? Any questions or comments from DC? Questions or comments from Maryland jurisdictions? And last but not least, any questions or comments from DOTs or transportation agencies? Okay, Lynn, you must have been super to the point and concise. Everybody got it, no questions.
Great, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next item. This is FY21 Transportation Alternatives Set Aside Program for the District of Columbia and Maryland TPB jurisdictions, and that's Ariana.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Just to want to clarify, it should be, that's a typo, it should be fiscal year 2022. So hello, everyone. My name is Ariana Kadunis, and I'm a regional planner here at COG. Today, I'll be sharing the TAP Selection Panel's recommendations for the Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside Program, otherwise known as TAP, for Maryland and the District of Columbia. TAP funding provides the TPB and COG with the opportunity to support capital improvement and fund programs that will help implement policies that we care about as a region, such as improving pedestrian access, safety for vulnerable populations, and access to economic opportunity. This year's recommended projects for Maryland and DC range the gambit from safety and accessibility improvements to trail rehabilitation and bridge replacement. Later today, the TPB Steering Committee will vote on 2 resolutions to approve the proposed project funding recommendations for both Maryland and DC. For reference, those resolutions are SR1 2022 and SR2 2022, respectively. Next slide. I'll begin my presentation by describing the Federal Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside Program and COG TPB's role in the TAP selection process, including the evaluation of our regional priorities criteria. I'll then drill down into the schedule and project recommendation details for both Maryland and the District of Columbia. At the conclusion of my presentation, I welcome all questions and comments with the understanding that the proposed recommendations will be voted on by the TPB Steering Committee later today. Next slide. In 2012, the surface transportation legislation known as MAP 21 established the Transportation Alternatives Program. The FAST Act of 2015 then renamed the program as the Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside or TA set-aside program, and the key features of the program largely do remain the same. TAP is a federal program that provides funding to projects considered alternatives to traditional highway construction, including enhancements to pedestrian and bicycle access and improving safety for vulnerable populations. The TPB's role with TAP is defined by federal law. Large MPOs are provided with sub-allocated funding to select projects in their regions. TAP funding provides an opportunity for us to fund regional priorities, and we've tried to emphasize those priorities in the application process. I'd say we were very successful with that this year. The states administer the projects, including conducting the solicitation and screening applications for eligibility. Once the projects are selected and approved, the state DOTs are responsible for getting these projects implemented, and we're very grateful to them for all that they do. Next slide. The TPB TAP selection process consists of independent project review by selection panels that represent COG TPB staff and the appropriate staff, state DOT representatives. By appropriate, I mean that the Maryland panel included DDOT and VDOT representatives with MDOT staff present as technical resources, and likewise the DC panel included MDOT and VDOT representatives with DDOT staff present as technical resources. At the Maryland and DC selection panel meetings on June 30th and July 7th, respectively, the panels each reached consensus to determine those selected projects. Next slide. These are the regional criteria we consider in the selection process. I've indicated in parentheses how much each is weighted for a total of 60 out of 110 points. Next slide. This is the TAP schedule for Maryland as established by MDOT. The application period ran from April 1st through May 17th. The selection panel convened on June 30th, and today the TPB Steering Committee, as I've mentioned, will be voting on the recommended projects. Next slide. This year for Maryland, we have $2,930,671 available for our regional suballocation. MDOT received 10 eligible applications representing a total of $13,269,768 in requested funding. Our selection panel is recommending funding for 6 projects for a total of $2,688,501 with $242,170 remaining. Next slide. The 6 recommended projects are listed here and will serve many of the TPB's regional key policies. 5 of the projects are in activity centers, and the 2 largest projects, which are Greenbelt and Oxen Cove, account for 77% of the TPB's suballocation, and they are both located in equity emphasis areas. 3 of the projects improve access to transit, one of which, Greenbelt, is a transit access focus area for improving walk-bike access to transit. All 6 projects support the National Capital Trail Network. 2 of the projects, which are New Design Road and Greenbelt, are for unbuilt segments of the National Capital Trail Network, and 1 project will fund rehabilitation of an existing segment, which is Oxen Cove. The remaining projects all support access to the network. The 3 largest projects, which are Greenbelt, Oxen Cove, and New Design Road, build upon planning studies that were previously funded by the TPB's Land Use TLC program, Transportation Land Use TLC program. I'm also just going to give a brief description of each individual project. So for the ADA Crosswalk at Lerner in Maryland 197, this project will design an ADA pedestrian walkway and increase access to a segment of the National Capital Trail along Maryland 197. For the Greenbelt Metro Station Hiker-Biker Trail, this project will construct a multi-use trail to connect and expand multimodal opportunities at the Greenbelt Metro Station, which is a transit access focus area. Maryland 187 and Cordell Avenue pedestrian safety improvements. This is a dangerous intersection in Bethesda, which will receive funding to design geometric and ped beacon safety improvements to increase pedestrian safety and help achieve the county's Vision Zero goals. The Maryland 188 Wilson Lane and Cordell Avenue pedestrian safety improvements is a Safe Routes to School project, which will construct pedestrian access improvements to Bethesda Elementary School as part of county and statewide efforts for Vision Zero as well. New Design Road in Frederick County is a 2.5-mile key segment of the National Capital Trail Network. It'll undergo 100% design funding with this grant and will be ready to move toward implementation following that. It's the first of 3 phases that'll eventually tie Frederick City with the C&O Canal National Park. Oxen Cove Trail resurfacing and bridge replacement. The project includes resurfacing and rehabilitating 1 mile of Oxen Cove Trail in unincorporated Oxen Hill and replacing a pedestrian bridge that was destroyed by flooding in 2015. All right, next slide. This is the TAP schedule for DC as established by DDOT. The application period ran from March 31st through May 12th. The selection panel convened on July 7th, and the TPB Steering Committee, again, will be voting on these projects later today. Next slide. This year for DC, we have $1,030,989 available. DDOT received 4 eligible applications for exactly that amount. So our selection panel is recommending full funding for all 4 projects with $0 remaining. Next slide. The projects recommended for DC are also highly consistent with regional priorities. All 4 of them are in activity centers, all are in equity emphasis areas, and all are close to high capacity transit. One of the projects, the Capitol Crescent Trail, is a vital link in the National Capital Trail Network. And going into each individual project briefly, the 11th Street Northwest Safety Improvements project will improve bicycle infrastructure in and adjacent to existing facilities, as well as incorporate pedestrian improvements through shortened crossings and improved visibility. The DDOT curb extension study will use DDOT's existing inventory of tactical installations and develop a methodology for identifying locations for upgrades to potentially make improvements. It'll then take 20 locations to a concept design that'll be ready to move toward permanent improvements. The Capitol Crescent Trail Rehabilitation, Phase 1, Planning and Design. This is the first step in a 2-phase project to fully rehabilitate all 3.7 miles of the heavily used Capitol Crescent Trail in DC. And this phase is for designing, planning, and environmental compliance. And finally, the Washington Union Station restoration in East Hall. The primary goal of this project is to complete historic East Hall decorative finishes, to clean, repaint, and conserve the historic decorative finishes on the upper walls above the pilasters and ceiling. Next slide. Please note at the beginning of this slide, it should say the TAP selection panel instead of COG TPB staff recommend. So with that aside, as mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, later today, the TPB Steering Committee will be voting on the TAP selection panel's Maryland and DC TAP project recommendations as per the following resolutions: SR1 2022 for Maryland and SR2 2022 for the District of Columbia. Next slide. So this concludes my presentation. I'll now leave the floor open for my colleague John Swanson to make any additional remarks he may have, and from there I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Ariana. That was I don't have a lot to add. I do want to mention, however, that the program this year was super competitive. Last year with the pandemic, we were undersubscribed, and that was really disappointing. We worked hard this year to kind of beat the drum and get applications, and really thank everyone for submitting some really awesome ideas. And sort of being oversubscribed is a double-edged sword. We're able to, make sure we can use this money, but we're also unfortunately not able to fund some really great projects. So we look forward to figuring out ways to move those unfunded projects forward. There is a statewide pot of funding for TAP in Maryland, and the unfunded projects for Maryland will be eligible for selection from that unfunded pot of funding. I'd also like to mention that we've really worked hard over the years to try to integrate the TAP program with TLC, and we're really pleased to see that a number of the projects this year, particularly some of the big ticket projects, are results of work that we've done, some groundwork that we've laid with the TLC program. So we're really pleased to see that paying off in that way. So, and then finally, the board's emphasis on safety, again, is kind of, I think, really emphasized with many of these projects. Ariana mentioned that, but I'll just say that again. Again, we have a number of different technical assistance programs, and we have this grant program, TAP. And increasingly, I think we're trying to work to really coordinate and integrate these activities. And I think that, again, it's paying off with this list of projects. So we're excited about it.
Well, thank you both, Ariana and John, for that highlighting that presentation. I will say that I can attest that your staff did a bang up job in trying to beat the bushes and make sure every jurisdiction paid attention and submitted projects if they were interested, because I was one of the contacts that you reached out to for this program. So I really do appreciate that. Any comments or questions for the team here from, let's say, DC? Comments or questions from Maryland? Comments or questions from Virginia? Okay, not hearing any WMATA or other modal agencies. Okay, well,
Hey,
thank
yeah,
you.
this is Carrie Snyder with MDOT. I
Okay,
just
go
wanted
ahead.
to mention really quickly. I know we told John Swanson and the TPB staff about the statewide TAP pot, but I just wanted to mention that the recommendations and the analysis and the review from the selection committee for the Maryland TAP projects, we've requested that that be sent to the state people as well for their analysis. That's going to go in their review of the remaining TAP applications that are going to be reviewed in August. So thank you so much for all of your work, guys. We appreciate it.
Excellent, thank you. Really quickly before we move on to the next item, I want to draw everybody's attention to Lynn's comment in the chat. And this is an advisory comment on the August full TPB board meeting. This was something I meant to mention after that item concluded. I just wanted to point out to everybody here, as if you're the sitting alternate on the TPB, or if you advise your primary member, make sure that it's understood that that item will be the only one on the August meeting if it's held, and that there will be no technical committee or steering committee meetings in the month of August. So that special meeting will just be for that conformity topic. So with that, I have done my job on that item. I'm albeit 2 items late. Moving on to the next item. So thanks very much, guys, for your presentation. Next item is a briefing on the Voices of the Region focus groups, and we have Karen for that one.
Thank you, Jason, and good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the focus groups that we conducted back in January. So as many of you know, my team, the public participation team, has been really busy starting the efforts, public engagement efforts to the update to Visualize 2045. So today I'm going to give you a summary of the findings from the focus groups. 30 minutes, as we have scheduled, is not enough to really present everything that we got through those focus groups, but I'm going to give you a summary of the things that we found most interesting, and then a couple quotes that came out of those focus groups as well. So Leo, if you can move to the next slide, please. So to begin with, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to engage with this quote that is from one of our participants, Isabella, from our focus group from the adult 60 plus and older, years older. So in this quote, Isabella is telling us that there are different ways to look at our transportation system. We can look at the big things, the big ideas, the big concepts, but we can also look at other things. And that is the experience that people come and have while using public transportation, while driving, while biking. there's this experience and it's how people feel it. And that's also important to really inform what's going to happen next and to plan for transportation in the future. And I specifically picked this quote from Isabella because this is exactly what we wanted to do with the focus groups. We wanted to emphasize the experiences of the people, and we wanted to give the opportunity for people to share their own narratives. So if you want to move to the next slide, Leo. So for the purpose for the focus groups, we wanted to understand the issues, three primary ones: transportation equity, safety, and climate change through different perspectives. And by different perspectives, I mean different community groups in the region. We also wanted to empower participants to share stories about their transportation experience. And that is to make sure that we're incorporating their voices directly into our research process, into our planning process. So it's not longer us telling what something is, it's them telling us what it is to them. And in that way, we're going to be able to have a more holistic perspective of different transportation issues. And lastly, we wanted to also supplement the quantitative data that is coming from the Voices of the Region survey. So when I talk about different ways to see different transportation issues, or to also consider these experiences of people, if we look at the Voices of the Region survey, one example is 84% of people are saying that they want the transportation officials to consider climate change when planning for the future. That's a number, that's a statistic. But what does that mean for people with disabilities? What does that mean for people who are older? And what does that mean for younger people? They all have different experiences, and to better plan for this, to prepare for climate change and transportation, we need to know about those specific stories and experiences. So next slide, please. So we talked with 11 different groups, 3 of them being based on their geographic location. So one session was with people from the core, another one's from people from the inner suburbs, and another one from people from the outer suburbs. The rest of the sessions were based on demographic characteristics. So we talked with people that identified having low income, people from the inner suburbs, young adults, also people with disabilities, people with high school degrees or lower, and people of color, and people who primarily speak Spanish as their primary language. We should say that one of the sessions for people of color and the session with people with high school degrees or lower were formed directly from the results of the Voices of the Region survey, because we identified that those were two primary groups that we did not receive enough input from the survey. So we wanted to supplement that information specifically with one of the sessions from the focus groups. So you can move to the next slide. So participant selection for this. We use purpose sampling for this, and that is a non-probability sampling method, and it involves identifying and selecting a group of individuals that are specifically knowledgeable or experienced with the topic of interest. In this case, we wanted to learn from specific groups, and we wanted to focus our attention on getting and reaching out to these groups. So we identified that we wanted diversity of perspectives and backgrounds rather than statistical significance, and that's what guided the selection of our participants. And why did we do that? So we wanted to make sure that we're focusing our resources in recruitment to reach out to underrepresented communities. And also we wanted to form homogeneous sessions, and that is for multiple reasons. One of them is not everybody might know that they're dealing with, under the everyday experiences, with issues that are transportation safety or transportation equity or climate change. But when you're put into another group with similar backgrounds or experiences, you might start to learn about those experiences and also be able to relate and share your own experiences. But most importantly, when you're dealing with people who have been underrepresented in public engagement processes, they do feel more comfortable being in a group with people that look like them or that have similar experiences as them. And we wanted to create that safe space for them to feel empowered to share their stories with us. Next slide. So here's what we have about for participant selection. We ended up with 112 participants. 57 from the core, 39 from the inner suburbs, 16 from the outer suburbs. There's a breakdown on age, which I'm not going to go through all of it, but I do want to emphasize that my team was very interested in reaching out to the 18 to 24 years old group. We wanted to hear from the younger adults for this session, and we were happy to have enough participants from that age group as well. Next slide. And then we ended up with gender, 65 females, 44 males, and 3 who identified as transgender. And then race, you will see a breakdown there. 3 people that prefer not to report their race as well. So if you can move to the next slide, please. So the analysis, we ended up with 17 hours of audio and approximately 600 pages of transcripts from that audio. So that's a lot of data, right? And what we ended up doing is we purchased a qualitative data management software that is called MaxQD8. And that helps us identify and manage emerging themes, but also to conduct systemic comparisons between those themes that we are given to each of the data formats. Now, I want to be very specific that the information that I'm providing to you and the information that you will see on the report for these focus groups is not just a summarization of what happened on those focus groups. It is based on qualitative analysis methodology, and there are emerging themes and concepts that are coming based on this methodology and also on the software that we use, MaxQDA. And the process that we follow is we use 3 phases to do the analysis. Again, a lot of data, a lot of audio, a lot of words. So the first phase was to just create general codes, which are known in qualitative analysis as codes, but they can also be known as themes. And we just gave the data as we started reading general themes to start breaking it down. We wanted to make sure we had the keywords to start guiding our analysis. The second phase was really more of narrowing those codes, figuring out what didn't work, what needed to be taken down, what needed to be concised. And the third phase was establishing the general codes, knowing which were the primary codes for the entire sessions altogether, and the primary codes for each of the sessions. So each of the focus group sessions as well. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you a summary of the focus groups. And the way this is going to work is I'm going to give you the questions, remind you of the questions. I have presented the questions, but it's been a while. And then I'm going to give you 5 to 6 different findings that were the primary ones coming out of each session. Now, the words that you will see on those bubbles are specifically words that the participants use. So we are being very careful that we're presenting this information in a way that the participants have been describing them as well. So if you can move to the next slide, please, Leo. So we're going to start with equity. So one of the questions that we ask is, based on your experiences and observations, what are some equity issues that you believe should be getting addressed in transportation? Second question was, tell me about things that transportation officials should consider in order to ensure equity in transportation. Now, these questions were broad, and they were broad for a purpose. We wanted to make sure that they told us what equity was to them. They wanted, and in many cases, they asked us to define equity for them, but we didn't. We wanted to know what equity was to them. And we get a diverse of different perspectives on this. So general findings for the session. Next slide, please. So here we look at equity, and we have 6 different findings that came out of this. 6 different topics that people believe are the primary things that we should be thinking about and addressing when it comes to equity. Buses arriving on time, geographic inequality in receiving transportation services, being able to afford housing near metro or jobs, access to reliable information, a transportation system that makes people feel as second-class citizens, and transportation costs affects access to opportunities. Can you move to the next slide, please? Today, I'm going to be describing what people meant when they were talking about transportation costs affect access to opportunities, buses arriving on time, and geographic inequality in receiving transportation services. Next slide, please. So Nina from Washington, D.C. And this quote was picked because it really emphasizes both the idea of what it means to people. She was describing what it means to see buses, or the problem of buses arriving on time, them being constantly late. But also it addresses the idea of geographic inequality in receiving transportation services. The context of this quote is that Nina works in the Foggy Bottom area of Washington, D.C., but she sees very different services as she's commuting every day. And to her, it's distressful to see that there are very long lines in the winter, making it crowded and making people wait in some areas, while in other areas it's significantly more easy to get into the bus or any other form of public transportation. In this case with Nina, it's related to buses and how crowded or how long to wait. But this is the case in very other different sessions about geographic inequality. For people of the outer suburbs, they discuss not having enough commuter buses for people who have night shifts. So for them, it's not having enough buses from people who might not have a job 9 to 5, while other people in other regions, they feel like they receive better services when they're trying to get to a job that is not a 9 to 5 job as well. Next slide. And with Gladys from Landover, Maryland, she's talking about the cost of transportation and what it means to think about how costly it is to use transportation in the region. In her case, she's describing that she has to pick about what to do, paying for transportation or doing other basic needs such as putting food on the table. So for her, the cost is unfair. And also, if you have a minimum wage, it's hard to get subsidies for people to get on transit as well. In the case with Gladys, she also described that she has had to give away jobs because the cost of transportation outweighs the income that she would bring home as well. And so what really does the cost of transportation, how can this affect people, right? So if you move to the next slide. So in the case of Sharon, also Washington, D.C., she was talking about how she's not able to afford jobs. And she, again, like Gladys, she's not able to take some jobs that she would really want to because the cost of getting there is more expensive than actually the income that she will bring. And this was the number one thing that came up over and over again during the equity session. Having to give away jobs, having to give away school because the cost was too much. And for this case, Sharon being one of our participants in the disability group, saying that it's nerve-wracking that the disability check, having to live out of that and not being able to afford to use transportation or get a job along with that. So with those, I want to move to safety really quick. If you want to move to the next slide. For safety, we did the same thing. We did not want to tell people what safety was from our perspective. We wanted to really gauge what safety meant to people. And this was for a couple of different reasons. When all of us are talking about safety, when we're reaching to our stakeholders, do they understand safety in the same way that we understand safety? And we wanted to gauge that awareness. How much do people know about it? Do they know it in the same way as we do? Or do they have different perspectives? So if we move to the next slide, let's see what the 6 different findings for safety are. So we have walking to transit late at night being one of the most primary concerns about safety. Lack of sidewalks on the way to transit or bus stops. Lack of, sidewalk connectivity. Congested traffic lanes make people feel unsafe. Public health and bike lanes make drivers and bikers feel safe. So let's hear from some people. If you want to move to the other slide, please. Today I'm going to talk about those 3 circles that were identified. So walking to transit late at night, lack of sidewalks on the way to transit or bus stops. And bike lanes make drivers and bikers feel safe. If you want to move to the next slide, please. So Nina here, I mean, she says that honestly, to leave out at 9, she has to make sure that a bus stop is well lit. And if it's not well lit, she will purposely walk, even if it's like an extra block to go to another bus that's more lit. And this was a common that we heard through all of the sessions, where people not only have to walk 1 block like Nina has to say, they depend on calling other people, even if it's 3-4 blocks, to pick them up on a car. Or they have to walk 20 extra minutes to get to a bus stop because it's not well lit. Now, Raul from Alexandria in Virginia, who is, this is a translation because Raul was part of our Spanish speaking session, is talking about working from home. Raul works in the service industry, gets out late at 9, and he described being concerned about different things during his walk and how that frustrated him because he has to worry about people being around, walking in dark places, drivers seeing him, and having to deal with crime. So to him, his description was, imagine getting out of a very late shift, being tired, and then having to worry not about one thing during your walk, but 4 or 5 different things, and how that's unfair for a pedestrian like him who cannot afford to use other types of transportation or that might not be available to him. But to him, he's saying that safety is not only about being in the car and driving safe, it's about the housing, the infrastructure, and the people, and how all of those things come together. And he wants to see more of those things coming together when it comes to planning for safety. Next slide. And then we have Diane Fleur, Bladensburg, Maryland. And she's talking in this particular story about a senior development that she lives in. The bus stop is right in front of her house at her development, but not many people use that bus stop because it's near a hill. So they feel like if you have the physical ability to run and avoid the cars because you can't see them, you will use the bus stop. But because they're all seniors, they're not able to do that. So in most cases, even though the bus stop, and in the way they describe it, sometimes they see it as they're getting on the Uber or taxi, they will not use it because they're scared that they will be run over by a car. And this is another common thing that has been described. The inability to feel safe to get into transit or get into bus stops. And that is what makes people shift to driving rather than using public transportation and other forms of transportation. Next slide. And this one too was very interesting as it was coming up. But as we had sessions of primarily drivers, and then we had some sessions with bikers, coming into consensus that bike lanes is not only for the safety of the bikers, but is also for the safety and the comfort of the drivers, because it helps them feel more comfortable driving, and to be aware that the street is being shared with other people, whether it's pedestrians or bikers or people using e-scooters. And that was a consensus that it was primarily found through all sessions in the safety discussion. Let's move to talk about a little bit about climate change now. So this one, we did something different with the questions. We asked them to imagine having a magic wand that would let them do anything they wanted to reduce their impact on climate change. And they can tell us what those 3 things were. So the main primary things that came out of the magic wand from all of the sessions were they would want safe biking options, more teleworking, better service hours for different transportation services, and then the last one, electric vehicles or electric buses. But the reason why we asked this like this was, one, we didn't know how much of an understanding there was between the connection between climate change and transportation options and choices. So we wanted to make sure that people told us what they thought or what they wanted, so we could gauge and measure that awareness. But also, we wanted to know what would people want to do if they were already thinking of climate change, to tell us and to know, so we knew what were some options that they were already thinking about. And then we moved into why are they not doing it? And what can we be thinking about to make those options more reliable for them? So if we move to the next slide. So here are 5 things that people are saying to consider about climate change as we plan for the future. One of them, climate change is not an immediate emergency for most people in all sessions. The other thing, physical ability affects access to sustainable transportation. Teleworking sometimes is the best choice for people far from transit. Sustainable transportation is only accessible to people working 9 to 5 jobs, and there's no infrastructure for electric cars in the region. So let's go to the next slide. Today I'm going to be talking about these 3 things. Climate change is not an immediate emergency. Physical ability affects access to sustainable transportation, and teleworking is sometimes the best choice for people far from transit. Next slide. So I want you to think about Cindy in Washington, D.C., who's saying that it's kind of like, I look at it like if you're in an airplane, you can't help somebody else if you don't take the oxygen mask first. And so you need to be healthy in order to be able to work in the environment for positive results. So if you're deceased or you're incapable of being able to work in it, then 2 birds are killed there. And that was just very explicit, but that was a mentality that was seen in almost all of the sessions, specifically with COVID-19 happening at the same time that we were having, or being at its peak at the time that we were having the sessions. Climate change came last when it came before public health. Climate change was not a priority for people with a low income. And climate change was not a priority when people had physical disabilities as well. I should say the 3 sessions, no matter how much we probe about climate change, did not talk about climate change. And that can be for multiple reasons. Maybe there's not an awareness of what really climate change is or how it's related to transportation, or there is just not a priority. And those 3 sessions were the session with low income individuals, which even though I probe, the conversation that came up even during the climate change conversation was job accessibility. People from the high school degree or lower session did not want to talk about climate change. They wanted to talk about overcrowded buses. And the people from the core did not want to talk about climate change specifically. They wanted to talk about public health. Next slide. And this one is from Nudie from Silver Spring in Maryland. When she's talking about disabilities, is sometimes when we talk about climate change and the alternative methods of transportation that we can be focusing to reduce our impact on climate change, she does not feel included in that conversation because she's not able to participate in the activities that most people are promoting. So for her, because she depends on cars and has low walking mobility, she's asking for more affordable housing near jobs, near schools, near shops, where she's able to move around more easily without constantly having to depend on getting on a car. And this was the primary conversation in the people with disabilities session that overtook the conversation on climate change. But it also, even though the low income people did not talk about climate change specifically, this was the conversation that came up during the allotted time for climate change. Being able to work closer to live closer to jobs. So if they had to think about climate change, then they wouldn't get on a car. So housing, very important for people when thinking about climate change and even transportation too. Next slide. and then Diana from Ashburn. So outer suburbs participants talked about the importance of teleworking and providing more teleworking options for people. But the caveat that came with this is everyone in the session, in the outer suburbs session, identify already feeling isolated. Again, going back to the idea of geographic inequality and isolation, feeling isolated, not having enough resources as people from the core or the inner suburbs, and not feeling part of the region when it came to transportation. And now she asks, as more teleworking is being promoted, what are we going to do? What are transportation officials going to do to make sure that the people from the outer suburbs are still included in the planning process, even when most of them might decide to telework? Where is that balance going to come from? And so even though they're suggesting for more teleworking options, they want to continue still being included, and they want that to be the primary concern that transportation officials have as they move forward. Can you move to the next slide, please? Again, so much information, and we picked the topics that would tell the story based on the findings. There is a lot more to come, and we want you all to know that there will be other ways to engage with the information. The focus group report will present the general findings along with the findings by each session. So as I mentioned, these are the findings just from everyone put together. But the important thing about this information is as you go through the report, you'll be able to find the findings based on each session. So you'll be able to identify for each of these groups, what are their priorities, what are their concerns, and what are they suggesting for the future. And there will also be findings that will supplement the Voices of the Region survey as well. And the narratives will be incorporated throughout the Visualize 2045 plan, and also the Voices of the Region story map that we will begin working on it pretty soon. And with that, I want to conclude my presentation. I don't know how we're doing on time, but I'm happy to take questions or via the chat as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen, very much. Are there any comments or questions from Maryland jurisdictions? Not hearing any. Any comments or questions from DC? All right. Comments or questions from Virginia? Comments or questions from WMATA or other modal agencies?
Hey, Jason, I just want to say good work, Karen. It's really interesting and important to hear these voices and everything else I'm putting in the chat. So no need to waste time.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, and I like this comment about deep dive, and one that had a lot of contextual, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? A deep dive on this item, and really tapping into the thoughts and feelings of the community across the region. So really good work. I appreciate that very much. Looks like, Karen, you're a glutton for punishment, so you're up again. The next item is aspiration to implementation, public outreach on existing projects that align with the aspirational initiatives.
Yes, so hello again. And so we're conducting our aspiration to implementation activity. I gave you a little bit of a background at our last meeting, but what we're doing is putting posters up that align with the aspiration to implementation, we have the aspirational initiatives that the board has endorsed. So as of now, we have most of our posters up, but we want to make sure that we have all of them up before we gave out the entire locations. We're just in the process of finalizing the last ones. But the ones that are out, we have had a lot of success with some of them. They're looking really awesome. We have an electronic version over at Union Station. So if you're able to check that out, that would be awesome. But this is an ambassador kit information that was put together by my colleague, Abigail Center. And it gives you information about how to get involved with the activity, how to tweet, use social media, and also how to just promote the event for us as we start getting into the weeds of it. And yeah, so the information that we acquire from this will be used to really bring together more information from the aspect of the public, kind of like the focus groups are doing, but to really supplement the analysis that the board conducted before endorsing the aspiration initiatives. So that's coming up soon. We will be sharing this with all of you. You have it now through the materials, but we will be sharing that with the list of locations pretty soon as well. And thank you. And yeah, Stacy just posted something in the chat. Thank you to all the support from our technical members who have been involved in making suggestions on where to place as posters and giving us ideas. It's been really great to see your suggestions and to see your support as well.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments? Questions? Okay, not hearing any. Questions or comments from WMATA or other modal agencies? Questions or comments from Maryland jurisdictions? Last but not least, Virginia. Okay, Karen, thanks so much. Moving on to the next item, we have local and regional electric vehicle planning, and that's Leah.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chair Groff. As the Chair mentioned, I will be sort of reviewing some of the EV-related activities and opportunities going on in the region, and hopefully provide some good information for you all to follow up on. Leo, I guess you have my presentation up. So next slide, please, which would be the second slide. I wanted to outline for you all a brief history of our EV efforts that sort of set the stage for developing the zero emission vehicle targets. And moving forward, I will just sort of say ZEV, but zero emission vehicle targets in the 2030 Climate and Energy Action Plan, which you all know that we just published this past November 2020. I won't go through all of these, but we'll highlight a couple actions for you to sort of just keep in mind moving forward. So just going right directly to our 2012 report, we published the COG EV report. It had 25 recommendations, and the top 3 were to develop a regional strategy to address obstacles to infrastructure planning, to promote EV adoption as a way to improve regional environmental economic benefits, as well as sort of a national energy security benefits. And then finally, to work to help the region remove barriers to EV adoption and infrastructure. So you'll note moving forward, these are the things, the primary things that we were working on that were set in the EV report. And a couple other things I wanted to point out here. In 2015, COG entered into an MOU agreement with Vision Fleet. That's the second to last bullet down. Vision Fleet was a full service consulting firm that assisted in large scale EV adoption for public fleets. We negotiated this deal with Vision Fleet for them to provide a certain level of sort of fleet analysis for free to 4 fleets that included DC, Prince George's County, Alexandria, and the city of Frederick. And so you'll see that in some of the other slides, I will point out that all of those jurisdictions have developed an EV plan or are working on it. Actually, they all have actually developed an EV plan. So we like to think that we early back then, we supported them in getting these EV plans off the published and working on their EV deployment. And then in 2016 through 2018, we were a part of a DOE-funded project called Fleets for the Future. I did present that way back when, seems so long ago, to this august body some time ago. It was a project to help buy down the cost of AFVs, alternative fuel vehicles, including electric vehicles and the infrastructure. So there were 5 regional councils who were partners to this, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, North Central Texas, of course, COG, us, PEMA, Association of Governments, and MARC, the Mid-America Regional Council. Next slide, please, Leo. And then here you see the 2030 goals. What was not posted on there or outlined, we also have the multi-state working group, which Aaron Morrow and our transportation staff has outlined multiple times for us, so I won't go through that. But that list that I presented is not inclusive of everything, but it shows the progression towards developing the ZEB targets in the 2030 Climate and Action Plan. And so these goals here, as you know, they are the mitigation and resilience goals. The ZEB measures are a component of the mitigation goal, the 50% greenhouse gas emission reduction. Next slide, Leo, please. And so the mitigation measures include very specific transportation and land use strategy measures, which include reducing single occupancy trips, VMT reductions that, obviously our transportation staff helped develop, but there are 3 very specific ZEB strategies outlined in the plan. 1, to expand light duty electric vehicle deployment, to accelerate electrification of medium and heavy duty vehicles, and to build out a regional EV charging network. And so to sort of set the context for implementation targets that were outlined in the plan, we're currently looking at less than 1% of the vehicles on the road in the region are plug-in electric vehicles. So that includes not traditional hybrids, but plug-in hybrid vehicles and all electric or all battery electric vehicles. So that's about, actually, it's about 0.2%, which is about 8,000, a little over 8,000 vehicles are constitutive of the plug-in vehicles are constitutive of all the vehicles on the road in the region. And then the charging stations, not actually ports, we only have about 852, and that's just in the COG region, not across all of Virginia and DC. And so the plan outlines these implementation targets for us to achieve in order to reach this 50% greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, strictly for the transportation measures. So that would be 30% of light duty cars will need to be zero emission vehicles. That's about 1.4 million. 9% will need to be light duty trucks, ZEB of course, and 4% will need to be medium and heavy duty trucks. And then 30% will need to be transit, EV transit buses. Next slide, please. And so here are some of the local plans that have been either completed or forthcoming or under consideration. So I will highlight a couple of them, but the city of Frederick, they were actually one of the Vision Fleet, they were under the opportunity to receive the Vision Fleet fleet analysis back in 2015. And so in 2018, they followed up with a community-wide EV plan. Also, the city of Alexandria, they recently completed their electric vehicle charging infrastructure readiness strategy. That's a community plan. And the Prince George's County developed a government operations plan with COGS assistance. Both Alexandria and City of Frederick, they did theirs independent of COG although Alexandria used our contracting mechanism, but Prince George's County worked with actually COGSAF to do their plan, which was completed this past March 2021. And then some of the forthcoming plans, DC's electrification roadmap, they're working with the Electrification Coalition to develop this plan. They've started sort of some sort of stakeholder listening sessions, started back in April. Their last one was June 24th, and they have some upcoming ones or sessions available on July 29th. And in August, I don't think the August dates have been published yet, but they have one coming up on the 29th. But they are available on YouTube. I think if you just, I think everything is sort of available on YouTube these days. But if you just search for DC Electrification Roadmap, you'll find at least 2 of their stakeholder sessions available to listen to. And as you know, that plan is a part of DC's carbon neutral, to become carbon neutral by 2050. And then independent of the city of Frederick County is working on both a county and community-wide EV plan. Yeah, next slide, I think that's it. So here, these are just 2 other jurisdictions that don't quite fit into those previous categories of either completed, forthcoming, or considering. They're sort of in the middle of all of sort of right under consideration. They obviously are aware of the role of electrification that plays in the region, but are trying to decide in what direction or how far to go with their development plans. So that would be obviously Charles County and Greenbelt. Greenbelt does fall under Prince George's County, so some of the work that Prince George's County has done on their community-wide plan would help to cover Greenbelt, but Greenbelt does have a sort of electric vehicle infrastructure planning group that they're considering where to go with, independent of what the county is doing. Next slide, please. And so here are some opportunities that I've listed here. Both the, and as you all know or have heard about the VW or Volkswagen settlement that happened back in 2016, both the Environmental Mitigation Trust and Electrify America project, which you see listed there, are results of funding, results of a VW settlement where in 2016, VW agreed to spend about $14.7 billion to settle allegations of cheating emissions for 2.0 liter and 3.0 liter engines. The settlement was divided into 3 pots of money. One pot was for a program for consumers, which got about $10 billion. The Environmental Mitigation Trust, which is also known as, you may have heard, Appendix D, received $2.9 billion. And then lastly, the ZEV investment program received about $2 billion, which is driven by Electrify America to install DC fast charging across the country. So all of those pots of dollars, that's a nationwide dollars, and then each either under the mitigation trust funding, each state received dollars. So speaking to that, the primary aim of Appendix D or the Environmental Mitigation Trust, is to reduce NOx emissions in the transportation sector, but also to provide opportunities for local governments to invest in electrification projects, which you'll see outlined in my points. So all total, DC, Maryland, and Virginia was eligible to receive upwards of $1.67 million. So again, that is not strictly for the COG region, because obviously Maryland and Virginia, they cover all of their states, but upwards of 167 million came to DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and I'll outline what each of them received. So Maryland, it was eligible to receive, or is eligible to receive, $75.7 million. DC will receive, or is receiving, $8.1 million, and then Virginia is to receive $84 million. And how each state chose to invest their funds was determined by their sort of air, energy, and climate goals, also their existing alternative fuel vehicle infrastructure, as well as expected emission reductions, benefits, and other variables. So as stated, like DC, they have a carbon neutral goal. So all their money was focused on obviously reaching those goals. And so with Maryland, they distribute their environmental mitigation trust funds, or Appendix D dollars, across multiple funding streams, from truck replacement, transit bus, marine engines, and cargo equipment. They recently closed, and when I say they, those dollars, or the administration of those dollars, is administered by the Maryland Department of Environment, MDE, in cooperation with other agencies like MDOT and MEA. So they distribute their dollars through sort of truck replacements, transit bus, marine engines, and cargo equipment. They recently, this past March, had a program called the Charge Ahead Grant and Electric Corridors Grant Program. These two programs were a part of the ZEB Infrastructure Investment Allotment, where about 15% of their total state allocated dollars, which, if you remember, was about $75.7 million, could be elected to deploy ZEB infrastructure. So MBA or MDA use 15% of those dollars, which is about $11 million, to deploy zero emission vehicle infrastructure. And so that Charge Ahead program was for facilitating charging stations at state-owned facilities and workplace charging, as well as the Electric Corridor program is to facilitate inter and intra-state travel with zero emission vehicles. So those awards aren't expected to be, awardees aren't expected to be notified until this winter. That program, the applications just closed, I believe, this past March. And so there are some upcoming things that Maryland should be aware of in terms of that funding stream. On the heavy duty side, they have an electric bus program, as well as medium and heavy duty vehicles for private fleets. MDE is right now uncertain of that funding amount, but the time frame, and as well as the time frame, but they expect to have a clearer picture based on how those existing programs that they have will be implemented. And then on the light duty side, they have a first round, which was just completed, which includes that workplace charging program, and then the corridor program. That program actually received $3.7 million. So they have a second and third round for that program. So the next round will be a round of proposals expected by this fall. So I would say, if you look in the Maryland jurisdictions, if you're looking for funding for light duty charging stations, they'll be putting out some information for fall dollars, as well as this last and third round of dollars in the second quarter of 2022. In Maryland, also under that program, they also have a school bus program where Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Frederick County, and Howard County all received, I don't have the exact dollars for them, but they all received funding to convert to electric school buses, and all of those counties received funding under Maryland's Environmental Mitigation Fund. And so DC, and I'll try to go through a little faster because it is a little after my time. DC, they had 3 project funding streams from locomotive replacements, electric transit buses. One of their programs is the DEAL program, the District Electrification and Low NOx program. It provides incremental funding to purchase AFBs. Pretty much all of that funding went to the DC circulator. You guys, I'm assuming most of you have seen those red and yellow electric, but well, not all of them are electric, but those buses, DC runs, 12 of them were converted or electrified, and most of that money went to, that pot of money went to electrify those buses, and as well as the infrastructure. And then our locomotive program, DC is working with COG actually to convert Amtrak switcher replacements from 5 old diesel powered switchers to clean diesel engines. So that's a big program there. And then for Virginia, they have a multiple, for their environmental mitigation funding, they have $82 million. Most of that money has already been allotted, I believe like 67 million or 82 million of the 84 million has already been allotted. And they have a unified statewide charging program with EVgo to provide charging stations across the state. So I'll go through this a little bit more quickly. Electrify America, again, that's part of the VW settlement. They are deploying DC or fast charging across the nation. There's a 10-year period of 4 30-month cycles. Right now they are in their, they're closing their second cycle of funding or charging stations and going into their third charging stations within the region. Or by the end of the 10 years, they expect to have about 800 public charging stations, DC fast charging stations, 35 of those chargers by the end of cycle 2 in the region. And currently in DC, they only have 1 DC fast charging at a Walmart on Georgia Avenue. In Virginia, there's approximately about 11. There's some out in Falls Church and Tyson's Corner. In Maryland, there's one at the Bowie Town Center, and there's one planned in the Hyattsville Mall and at Wheaton. And so getting to the Mid-Atlantic Electrification Program, I think you guys, this body has heard from Ira Dorfman, I think maybe 1 or 2 meetings ago, from the Greater Washington Clean Cities Program. This electrification program is to sort of install or connect electric vehicles and charging across Virginia, Maryland, DC, and West Virginia. There's a lot of work going on up in the Baltimore area, but specifically in the region or in DC, there's an effort with the Department for Hire Vehicles to install DC fast charging. As you all may know, there's fast charging at Union Station up just on the H Street side there. I think you can, as you all have been to the before COVID to COG, there was always a line of taxis right there. They were going to the charging stations there. But there's been some issues, and so the Department for Hire Vehicles is looking to this program, the Mid-Atlantic Electrification Program, to possibly install 2 new stations. And then there's the Maryland Public Service Commission. Yes.
This is Kanti. Would you quick summarize this? And I know we have one more slide, so we need to get that.
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, let's get to, I think the most important thing here, and I'll get to the 8th slide, Leo. So if you go to the next to the last slide is, so to support all of this work, COG has sort of this master contract in place with ICF and CATMIS that jurisdictions, which I noted with the slide with City of Fairfax and Frederick using their dollars to do EV planning. We have a task order to complete like climate and energy and planning, and that contract is available to our jurisdictions to use for EV planning. And so much like the climate planning work, there are similarities in EV planning that we wanted to sort of put to you guys in terms of doing a regional EV plan. And so we wanted to put out there that there's some baseline or common interests that we could look to for a regional plan. Some of those commonalities would be sort of looking at the utility programs that are available in Maryland and through the Maryland Public Service Commission and Dominion's Energy Smart Charging Program, and then the technology specific specifications and vendors. And so there's some specific data needs that a regional plan would not be able to sort of address. Obviously, that would be sort of assessing, electrical capacity and the number of charging stations that each individual jurisdiction would need to address. So what we're saying here is, in order for us to sort of do a regional plan, that regional plan would outline commonalities that each jurisdiction could include in an individual plan, and then your individual plans could obviously assess your specific needs. So those are some of the things that we're looking to do. COG staff is currently, again, developing a regional planning framework to include cost estimates for developing necessary common elements. Those plans would look like maybe EV infrastructure gap analysis, an EV plan for government operations, or EV plan for community. So that is it in the nutshell. If there are any questions, I know I kind of went through that very quickly, but that I conclude here.
Thank you, Leah. Sorry I had to rush there in the end. Always a tight schedule. I appreciate all coordination that's been going on across the region with you and your team. That being said, are there any comments or questions from Virginia jurisdictions? Any comments or questions from DC? Comments or questions from Maryland jurisdictions? And any comments or questions from WMATA or other modal agencies?
Jason,
I'm not hearing any. Yes,
Jason, I just want to know.
Just want to say, I was going to thank Leah. I think you probably signed the presentation. She's very knowledgeable about this particular work activity. And within COG's environmental program area, there's a lot of work that's been going on with vehicle fleet electrification and building up the infrastructure. As TPB gets more focused on addressing and mitigating climate change effects and adapting to it, the focus on electrification of fleets is going to be a critical part. And this is kind of why we are trying to have regular briefings to the TPB's technical committee from the environmental program staff, because this is an area that might dwell in transportation, but it has a direct link to the environmental goals and what have you. So there are lots of opportunities. So we will be happy to bring back additional information, but please be aware that Leah and Jeff and Maya are resources that would be available to the transportation departments that typically may not have been working with them. But there are other agency staffs within their jurisdiction know this staff. So please, and that's one of the ideas. So thank you, Leah.
And I just wanted to add, if I had any gaps in my presentation, to reach out, or you didn't understand anything, just obviously reach out to Lynn and Conti, and they'll contact me and I'll provide the information. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know both Leah and Jeff have been working with our staff as well on these programs, so we appreciate that very much. I know Mark Phillips posted a link to WMATA's zero emission vehicle bus program in the chat line. So if anybody's interested in taking a deeper dive on that, I think that's what Mark was trying to say. But Mark, I'll give you an opportunity if for any reason you had anything else to add.
No, I'm good. Thanks, Jason.
Sure thing. All right, thanks everyone on that item. The next item is Travel Trends Dashboard Demonstration from Tim Kinane and Charlene Howard.
Good morning, everyone. Especially early good morning to you, Mr. Chairman in California. I'm very excited to kick off this presentation. I'm going to quickly turn it over to my colleague Charlene. Charlene and her team have been busy putting together what we're calling a dashboard. Jessica is also on the call who's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting behind this. Part of our UPWP work program has been specifying preparing more visualizations of a lot of the information and data that we collect, and a lot of MPOs are moving over to us, termed in the industry a dashboard. A dashboard to me often implies real-time data. So it's not quite real-time data, but it's refreshable data. As it becomes current, we do refresh it. We're in the process of developing a dashboard, and we want to just show a work in progress to you. The data may not be perfect, the visualizations may not be perfect, but we think they're at the point where it would be helpful to show you what we're thinking and what we're building, and reach out to you and get your ideas, suggestions, criticisms. Hopefully there are none, but certainly we'll take them if there are. But we wanted to give Charlene a chance to show you this work in progress. We think it's a very exciting time for us to sort of take our data to the next step, next level in terms of visualizations. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Charlene Howard, who will give us a quick demonstration of this work in progress. When she's done, she'll flip it back to me, and then we can entertain any questions if there's time. But we are certainly interested in hearing back from you. If we don't have times for questions afterward, I'm going to put both mine and Charlene's email address in the chat box, so I do encourage you to send us your ideas. With that, I'll turn it over to Charlene.
Good morning. Thank you, Tim, for the introduction. I'm going to shortly turn off the camera and share my screen. Leo, is there anything that you have to do to pass the mic to me in that regard?
No, there's you could just share your screen
Okay,
whenever
perfect.
you like.
Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to go dark and start sharing. Excellent. So hopefully the appropriate screen will come up. Can you see the dashboard?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. Basically, this is just a collection of data that we have, mostly existing within TPB. I did go out and get some data from other sources, but as Tim said, this is an early beta version of what we'd like to start showing, and the idea is to try to just provide you a collection of what we have, what may be possible, and then turn the floor over to the committee for some hopefully robust discussion on, you know, maybe what you like, what you don't like, what's missing, what can we do. This was a very, I guess, early collection of what we do. So I'm going to, without further ado, start going through these tabs. And we've kind of organized it into different tabs based on collections of like data. And we basically focus on a lot of vehicles, people, and assets. That's kind of like the breakdown. Before I start, I will just give a shout out to Jessica, and I will acknowledge everybody, and Jessica's on standby in case my connection goes down, but I think everything's okay. So the first thing we'd like to show is some traffic volume information. As most of you probably know, we do rely on the traffic counts that we get from the annual AADT as well as hourly program counts to help inform our travel demand model and just kind of see what's going on. They've also been used recently in some of the COVID analysis work that my colleague Martha has done. So traffic counts are kind of a big deal. So we wanted to show a little bit that we've done, and the most recent collection of measured vehicle classification counts we have is for 2018, and this dashboard might not look very exciting right now. You see a map of, you know, just a bunch of dots, but the power will be when we turn it on to do the selections. And if you bear with me, I'm going to try to minimize the little window we have here because it's getting in the way of my tools for this dashboard. Okay, perfect. So as you can see, the map does say select a specific station using the selection tool in the top right. This will populate all graphs. And the reason we do this is because this dashboard is specifically targeting this station that one selects. And you'll see in the other dashboards that we have different things going on. But for now, we will go in and pick a station. And I'm just going to go in here and pick one of these stations, and all the stations where we do have 2018 classification hourly counts for these particular stations. These are not all of the stations in our area, but these are the ones that we have for 2018. So once you do pick it, it does zoom to that station, and then we have a bunch of metrics. We have the classification down here in our nice little donut charts. We have an average hourly weekday measured volumes for a 24-hour period. So you can see not a lot going on in the midnight hour, but we get to the AM rush and there's a lot more traffic, probably about tenfold. We also have it broken down on the left by time of day. And these time of days are a little bit different than the right-hand side. The right-hand side does start at the 24 hours, so like the 0 hour to 23, and the AM, midday, PM, and night are classified as I believe AM starts at 6 a.m. if I'm not mistaken. But you can kind of go and pan through some of these some of the visualizations to try to see the data that comes up. If you hover, it will show you the total number. So for this midday classification, this orange stretch has buses and the number is 176, but that accounts for 4.25% of the total volume for that day. So again, like Tim said, this is kind of a first step. This is what we've put together for this. This is not by any means the only data that's available for this particular data set, but this is what we've pulled out. So we have all of the stations through our jurisdictions. We will go to, and some of the stations we do have in here for the modeled area as well. So that's why you'll see Howard and Arundel. But just one more, we will go to Loudoun County and you will see differences. So I'm going to move on from traffic volumes to more of the people aspect, I will say, because this data dashboard does tie to the Census Transportation Planning Package, which measures the destination, travel time, and means of transportation of workers from the county of residence. And before I forget, most of the dashboards we have has this little tool on the right and hopefully on the left, I'm sorry, hopefully you can see this, but as you pull it out, this is kind of our metadata tab, if you will. It basically tells you where we are getting the data from. So you can click on one of these and it will pull up a link to the actual data table from the CTPP, which is helpful. And then you can download it. You can look for other tables, but that's kind of just a way that we let you know what we're doing, like what data we have going on here. And again, this data is by county of residence, and it also is based on a selection. So we are going to pick Prince George's, and once you pick your county, it populates. And the reason we have it separated out this way is because, and I will demonstrate real quick and then go back. If you pick a whole bunch of counties, the data gets really messy because it basically will show you every flow from every county. So we're kind of cautioning against doing that. So we will just, well, of course, now that I'm trying to just pick one county, it's not working. So we're just going to pick one. If I can do my mouse correctly. Okay. So these tables populate based on what we found over here. And the first one is the mean travel time to work in minutes to the workplace from the county of residence that's populated. So we will see Prince George's workers that go to Jefferson County have the longest travel time in minutes, and one of the shortest is intra-county, surprise, surprise, Prince George's to Prince George's, and that kind of makes sense. Not always the case, but in this case it does. And then we break that down by the minutes, the travel time in minutes by the means of transportation. And no surprise, transit does have a higher means of transportation minutes. We also break it down over here. This is the total means of transportation to workplace. And this one's kind of confusing to explain, and hopefully people that are familiar with the CTPP may understand it a little more than I can hope, and I will hopefully explain it. It's not the total numbers of, it's the total numbers of the workers to these workplaces, and not necessarily the number of people in the vehicles. So that's the best way I can describe it, but more detail will be in the tables if you need further clarification. And then we also have the percent means of transportation to the workplace, and this breaks down by single occupancy, carpool, transit, non-motorized bike walk, other, and then telework. So we are going to move from the people aspect to transit, and we are here we're showcasing some data we get from WMATA based on the average weekday Metro Rail ridership by station, by month, by period. And we've gotten this information for several years now. We have it back to 2010, and this dashboard on the left, it's a Tableau visualization, and Jessica did a really good job, I think, of showing this in any possible way we want. So if you click on the individual bars, you will see for all stations per each year. And then if you want to, and that's for 2019. And if you want to switch years, you can. And if you want to see an individual station, you can also do that. So this is the station that I walk to. It's not necessarily my closest, but Brookland. You will see by different times of day for 2019. We'll go back to 2013, and you can see the bars rise and fall and do all sorts of things. So we wanted to kind of mix up an ArcGIS based application as well as showing some Tableau, and in the future we're going to also feature some Power BI visualizations, just to show you that everything can kind of be put together. Not everything is mappy, not everything is tabular. You know, it's a pretty flexible way. It's just about how we have the data and how we can structure it, and then to best tell the story of what's going on. So turning over to the right side of the dashboard, we do just have a general average weekday passenger boardings on the annual scale. And this is a table that's readily available on the WMATA website. We downloaded it, Jessica visualized it, so you can just kind of see the ridership trends. And this is all stations, all years, but it's back to 77, which is kind of cool. The last thing I want to show on here is, again, we're showing 2019. And it's a similar data to the stuff we show in the Tableau, but this is visual by station. So again, we have symbolized. I'm going to zoom in here so you can kind of see the stations possibly a little more clearly. The bigger metro symbols mean more ridership than the little guys. So if we select, and the table on the lower right has each month average here, but if you click on a station, the numbers will change for that station. So that's the branch avenue. If we don't have anything selected, it goes back to all stations, and you can kind of do it that way. So it's just another way to visualize the data. So I am going to take a drink of my water because I've been talking a lot, but we're going to move on to a data set that I downloaded. We use it, but we haven't processed this, and I will explain that very shortly. So this is the bridge condition of the bridges in the National Capital Area, and Federal Highway put together this really cool InfoBridge web portal. If you haven't seen it, you should really check it out, because this has all sorts of really cool data. You can slice and dice it many different ways, and we got some ideas on how to show some of the visualizations for the bridge data there. The reason I say that, you know, this is just downloaded from this site and we didn't process it yet, my colleagues on my team traditionally do get this data for the systems performance team, and then we put it all together. But when I discovered the bridge data portal that FHWA put together, I was like, hey, let me see what this is like. And lo and behold, the data is still kind of in a state of questionable formatting, if you will. But the good thing is it has XY coordinates ready to go, and we can kind of easily bring it in. So this is for 2020, and we will be evaluating how we're going to be getting the bridge data in the future, but this was kind of fun to put together. And we have historical bridge condition by good, fair, poor, and you can see that most of the bridges are fair. The average bridges built year on the National Highway System is 79, where all the bridges in the region are 73. So that's kind of good news, right? I don't show all of the bridges in the region by default, but if we turn them all on, you will see that there's a lot more than we show on the National Highway System. But the National Highway System is what we are required to report on for performance-based planning. So my mouse is getting funky here, but I did want to show we do have 27 bridges according to this data that are still listed in poor condition. And this is a list of them on the right side of the map, and you can zoom, you can pick one and we can zoom to it. I zoomed into this one in Rock Creek Park because I go running here several times a week and I'm always under this bridge. And now I know that this particular one by Joyce Road might follow me at any day. So, but if I go down the road a little bit, I'm better off. So that is a pretty bad joke, but we can just kind of zoom around the region to see where these bridges are. We can also see a pie chart on the left, I'm sorry, on the right, bridge condition by NHS and all of the bridges. So just under 40% of the bridges in our area on the National Highway System are in good repair, a little bit higher than 40 for all bridges. And we have just under 2% that are poor and just almost 3% that are poor for all bridges. So it's a toss up. And the only other thing I wanted to show is we did break it down by functional class of roadway. And as you can see, if you do the all bridges, there's a lot more different functional classes as you go out, because most of the NHS bridges are on the major facilities, I guess is how I would interpret this. So this was kind of fun because it's it's kind of a real thing you can see. And this was a very late addition to this dashboard because of what happened to the PED bridge collapse. I was like, ooh, bridges, hot topic. So that's what you're seeing here. Unfortunately, that bridge is not in this display, but it just kind of got me thinking again that this is kind of important stuff. So moving on to more roadway characteristics, and I'm calling this system performance / roadway because we are highlighting the congestion dashboard that Andy's team puts together. And this congestion dashboard is on our COG website, and if you look at the link on the bottom, you can go to it. We do have it here, but you can see this is just a graphic right now. So what we did is, I am going to the wrong thing, and I lost my dashboard page. That is not fun. Let's go back here. Okay. So coming back to the roadway, we do have a little blurb here about the National Capital Region Congestion Report, which these are the metrics that James puts together. But the power of the dashboard here is you can click on these different items and kind of isolate some of the data points that you want to perhaps look at more in depth. So that's why we're showing that this is also a Tableau visualization. And then we have some weekday cumulative VMT growth over here. And some of my colleagues on our team put this together, and we have it for the modeled region. And then you can kind of, select one or two or however many jurisdictions you want to see all together. So I'm just going to pick some random ones, and this might not even make a lot of sense, but we'll see. But yeah, you can see for the cities that we pick. But again, just kind of showing flexibility in the way we can display different things. And I will say, depending on how you want to show things and what kind of data you have and what kind of graphs you want to make, the tables in the background might have to be formatted in ways that may not seem intuitive. So I will be reaching out to my colleagues when we do start doing this, quote, for real, to figure out how to best display everything. I'm going to do a very brief touch on safety. Excuse me. And this is basically, this kind of came up from our COG board retreat work that I'm also supporting. And these are fatal crashes in the region from 2016 to 2018. And this is purely locational based heat map. This is not anything to do with like, there's tons of crashes by numbers, tons of fatalities by numbers here. This is basically just a heat map of where there's a lot of points, a lot of crashes that were reported at an XY location. And you can see that the core, the DC core, and a lot of the inner suburbs have higher, they light up a little more, but we do have a hotspot down in Charles County. And I do believe that might be a data issue, but it is something that that we may need to investigate. And then we just kind of break this heat map into just an equity emphasis area. So you can see that these areas are where we have the census equity emphasis, the census tracts that are defined as equity emphasis areas. And we just have, excuse me, a map of the fatal crashes that have bicycle and pedestrian involvement. It's not, again, these are just locations. So you will see the overall, I'd say maroon, all fatal crashes. And then if there's a periwinkle one, it's a pedestrian involved, and the pink is the bicycle involved. So some further ideas, future possibilities. We have more crash data. We have some data from Voices of the Region. We could show some pandemic. We can show more system performance stuff. So, we're kind of just taking a first cut. We thought, these are data that might be interesting to people. And I will wrap it up here to leave time for questions, comments, thoughts. I'd like to acknowledge Jessica again, Jessica Murr, Nicole McCall, Martha Kyle, James Lee, John Sherman for the data. My contact information is here. Tim said they would also put our emails in the chat box, but I am going to wrap it up, stop sharing my screen, or maybe I'll keep the screen up in case you have questions, but I'll put myself back on mute for now and sit back and listen. I'm going to turn it back over to Tim. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Charlene. As you can see, we're really excited about this. There's just lots of different ways we can provide visualizations of the data that we deal with every day into a single tied together tool like this. So we're building it. This is version not even 1.0 yet. It's a work in progress. I've already got the comment from Chloe to consider putting commuter rail ridership information in there. We're happy to do that, and we're happy to hear your ideas. So if we don't have time to take them here, certainly let Charlene or me know. I put our email addresses in the chat box. So Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much to you both. Very informative presentation and very interesting tool. So we look forward to more work with that. We are only about 4 minutes behind schedule, so that's not too bad. We'll try to hurry up and end on time. But before we go, any questions or comments from DC? Questions or comments from Maryland?
Yeah, Charlene, this is really terrific. I'm very excited. I like the format. I think there's a lot of good thinking. Obviously, you could put ride-on data on as well, like you can for VRE. So it's not just Metro Bus and Metro Rail. The other issue is there anything on travel flows? I know there's the journey to work stuff that you showed. Is there anything else on jurisdictional travel by time of day?
I am going to let somebody else on my team answer that. Hopefully, the journey to work stuff is what I am familiar with. We might be able to use some stuff we get from the model, but that would be estimated, I believe. If
Or
anybody
the
else has any
or the
ideas.
travel survey.
Yeah, we
Gary,
could
I was
definitely put
I was
travel
just thinking
survey
the
in
travel
there.
survey is certainly an option for that. And certainly we're getting the census data that will be coming out from the 2020 census. So whatever sources that are out there that we can use and put into here that are of interest to you, we certainly want to hear that. So your interest is noted for sure, and we'll look into that.
Thank you.
Yes, Gary, and I do acknowledge the transit ridership. We do collect the average weekday transit ridership for all of our modes. We have that for up to 2019. Jessica was collecting that for 2020, and I know some of that data is spotty, and it also depends upon our partners giving us the data. And most partners have been very good, and Ride On has been very responsive. Not all partners are, so I will. Maybe this will be a good reminder if you want data in the dashboard, if you don't want a big hole in your jurisdiction.
Could you, one other thing very quickly, could you have a button that says if you want to know COVID information, that you would already get your bracket from whatever it is, January of 2020, to if you wanted to compare pre-COVID and COVID? There would be maybe an easier way of doing that.
We can certainly look
possibly.
into that. Yeah.
Yep.
Just being able to set time framed parameters like that. I mean, because if we can go forward and backward with some of these time series data, we might be able to, predefine periods like the COVID period or the pre-COVID period. We could certainly look into that.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions or comments from Maryland jurisdictions? Not hearing any. Any questions or comments from Virginia jurisdictions? And of course, last but not least, any questions or comments from WMATA or other modal agencies?
I will just echo the positive feedback and the high five on this. It looks very cool, and I can't wait to see where it goes. Tim and Charlene, I'll probably circulate it within my office because I work with a bunch of data nerds that would love to get their teeth into this. So I'll get back to you soon.
Super. Thanks, Mark.
Excellent. Last call for questions or comments. All right. Excellent work. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Moving on to Mr. Meese and the update on connected and automated vehicles. And I'm glad to give you a little bit of time, Andrew. I know you're generally later on the agenda on your items and you get kind of squeezed out sometimes. So got some time this time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everybody. I actually will be quick today. I think there's just the memo that was in the mail out. I don't have any additional materials today, and just to try to give the quick story on this connected automated vehicle, CAV for short, was one of those things back when we did the Visualize 2045 in 2018 that maybe there was some room for improvement, didn't have a lot of information, but then again, what we're up against is who knows, are these things going to be deployed quickly or slowly? What's the evolution? What's the market uptake? So it's going to be a little bit difficult. To address these, we've done a couple of things. One is, as I think I've mentioned before, we had an expert, our consultant team, do a white paper on considerations for the TPB planning process, and that's really our focus. And then maybe following out of that would be, what are we going to put in the next version of Visualize 2045? And our nomination coming out of this white paper discussion process is to have some sort of TPB principles on CAV, more at the policy level, talking about what TPB wants to state and reiterate about its goals for the region, even if, or with the advent of CAVs. So we as staff have been developing some. Strawman, we went to the relevant subcommittee, which is Systems Performance Operations and Technology Subcommittee, or SPOTS. They actually met yesterday, which not much turnaround time to today's briefing, and gave us some good feedback on the draft that we had presented. And we're going to go back and digest this and hopefully bring it back for the next round this fall. So what I'm hoping, agenda time permitting, is that this will be a more substantive item on the September Tech Committee agenda, where we'll actually talk about some draft principles, and hopefully that an edited version of those could move forward to the TPB for consideration in the fall. And then as well as just to be ready for incorporation into the text portion of the next Visualize 2045 document. So that's where we are right now. What I'll do for people who are real eager, I'm going to put a link in the chat to the materials from yesterday's SPOTS meeting, with the caveat that these are the materials that were going into the meeting and don't necessarily reflect the comments that were received at the meeting, and what kind of revisions that we'll make from there. So I'll put that in the chat. People could take a look at it. There's a short list. There's a long, complicated matrix that was from the staff brainstorming session. I would say that my interpretation from yesterday's meeting is that we were fairly close to the mark. We didn't get a lot of radical comments, but with any of these things, we can see where it goes. People may have comments. Maybe it's worth mentioning that we are trying to keep these at the policy principle level, and these are not strategies or tactics, and we're not getting into engineering details or something like that. So that concludes my report. I'd be glad, Mr. Chairman, to take any questions or comments.
All right. Any radical comments from Maryland? How about from Virginia? How about undeniable truths from DC? And then, of course, WMATA and other modal agencies. All right. Doesn't sound like any radical comments here either. Excellent. All right. Thank you, Mr. Meese. Moving on to other business. Lynn, your lightning round items look shorter than usual, so maybe we might, well, I'm not going to say it.
Don't say it. Don't
say
say it. Mark Moran is going to talk about climate change mitigation study. So that's like that. It's an automatic fail for timing. Anyway, hi. So we're going to start with 2017-2018 regional travel survey with Conti.
Okay, thank you all very much. You will recall that TPB once every 10 years spends a couple of years and close to a couple $1 million collecting region-specific data on people travel choices, travel behavior, travel patterns, sort of a census kind of effort for our region. And we completed that effort in 2018. And in 2019, you received a number of briefings on the first set of extracted findings and results from that survey that directly helps the TPB travel demand model. And at that time, we said there is a lot more information here, kind of to go along with Karen's presentation earlier today, where she talked about us reaching out to people and asking them about their travel experiences. This survey, there is a lot more to take a deeper dive and to understand their patterns, their choices, their behaviors when it comes to travel. So we asked you, as we were working on the first round of data extractions, we asked you for any suggestions and thoughts, what additional information might we want to extract. We got 10, 11 different, we got many different ideas. We identified about 10 or 11 of them. So all of this is going to be continuing deep data, a deep dive or data mining, if you will, and this information would be available to all of you. So I'm going to have Nicole, who is leading this effort, and there's a number of your staff people working on it. So Nicole, please share what our plan is, what the schedule is, and what data is available. But once again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of you all having this data, whether it is the 2024 update or the 2026 plan update. This is the type of information I hope that the presentation that Karen made today and the data that we'll be providing, this data clearinghouse, all of this is to help you all have some information. I'm not saying you don't already have it, but this is additional information that we have been able to gather and provide you as you make important transportation project planning and programming decisions. So, Nicole?
Great, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much. When Ken was sharing the findings, we did ask you if there's anything in particular you would like us to dive in more deeply and look at. So we collected your questions that you submitted to us over time, and last fall we took a close look at them and selected those that we felt the RTS could shed light on and began to conduct this in-depth analysis. The topics are pretty wide-ranging. They include travel patterns for low-income households, work start and end times, growth in telework eligibility and frequency, telework and proximity to high-capacity transit, dimensions and characteristics of peak and off-peak travel, socioeconomic characteristics of commute-only versus all-purpose transit riders, transit riderships, free parking, and transit subsidies, so the interaction of those three, characteristics of late-night trips and travelers, trends in late-night travel modes, and use of personal vehicles for activities after using transit for work commute trips. And finally, we also looked at school trips. So we're super, super excited to share this research with you. We've been working on it really for about the last 9 months. And it is up and posted. You can access it by navigating to the RTS webpage and clicking on Regional Travel Survey In-Depth Analysis. We'll be delivering presentation on some of the select questions from the project to the Travel Forecasting Subcommittee and the Regional Public Transportation Subcommittee later this month. In September, we are planning to come back to this committee and deliver a high-level overview of the project. And we are also looking for more opportunities to highlight this research, so please go check it out. We are so pleased to share this with you. That's it.
Great, thanks, Nicole. Next up, we have Nick to talk about Car Free Day.
Okay, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so Car Free Day, we typically do a proclamation in July, but with the board. However, we're going to be pushing that back to September due to the all of the other agenda items that have been on the TPB's docket. So the idea is we want to work with our Car Free Day Steering Committee meeting over the summer at the local level so that local jurisdictions have an opportunity to adopt a proclamation. We have the proclamation ready, and we have a Car Free Day Steering Committee meeting next week. So we're really going to try and push the committee members to work with the local jurisdictions to get proclamations approved through the jurisdictions over the summer, and then hopefully we'll be able to get some type of message to the TPB in September about Car Free Day. Car Free Day is on September 22nd. I know the TPB meeting is on September 15th, so it doesn't give a whole lot of time, but the whole notion is that we want to really encourage people to use alternative forms of travel, particularly if a large number of folks are going to be coming back, returning to work or returning to the office. We want to make sure that they're not driving alone. And this will come on the heels of a larger TDM recovery marketing campaign that we launched last month to encourage individuals to start using or to start thinking about how they're going to get back to the office when their office is open. So again, we'll be back in September. We'll be back for sure to this committee to present the information on Car Free Day in September, and then hopefully we'll be able to get the message on the proclamation to the TPB as well. Be happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Nick. So we'll do questions at the end. Our next up, we have a resiliency study update from Stacy.
Hi, and good morning, everyone. You can hear me?
Yes.
Great. So thanks again to many of you have coordinated regarding the TPB resiliency study that's been conducted over the last 7 months or so. This is just a first step in working across the region to look at the issue of resiliency. And products have included an internal memorandum and a white paper that will be a companion to the long-range plan. And so our next step is internal review and a little enhancement of that, followed by sharing that with our technical members to make sure anything that is reflected regarding their activities in that documentation is correctly communicated. So we'll be providing via email an opportunity to those of you that had any contribution to that, the chance to review it before the white paper is finalized later this fall. So that's all for now, but I do thank you for your time with that, and we'll be having conversations as we go forward about what we learned, opportunities that we may be able to do with our members in the region in order to advance this very important planning area together. So have a great weekend, and thanks for your time.
Great, thanks, Stacy. Next up, Charlene. Again, welcome back, Charlene, to talk about high capacity transit map project.
Hi, I wish I had more exciting news for you, but I've been a little busy, as if you might have guessed after seeing that. I will get the proposal to Conti for his sign off, and then we'll start to engage our partners. So that's all I have to say.
That's totally fine. So to be continued. Great.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks, Charlene. So next up, Erin's going to talk to us about an update on the Transportation and Climate Initiative.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So on June 10th, the Transportation and Climate Initiative released some new documents. The documents include the model rule for their Cap and Invest program, a summary of public input received since the draft model rule was released in March, the draft framework for public engagement, the draft model implementation plan, and the draft proposed strategies for regional coordination. So public input on the 3 draft documents is requested by August 13th. And there is a memo in your packet with an overview of these updates from TCI, and we plan to share that memo with the TPB this month in Conti's Director's Report. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Erin. Next up, Mark's going to talk to us about the TPB Climate Change Mitigation Study release of our report. Mark.
Yes, thank you. So the TPB Climate Change Mitigation Study, or CCMS, is a 12-month scenario study whose goal is to identify potential pathways for the region to reduce on-road transportation sector greenhouse gas emissions to meet various goals associated with the years 2030 and 2050. The study is divided into 2 phases. Phase 1 was already reported on by Aaron Morrow at past meetings, including the February meeting of the TPB and the May meeting of the CPC. Phase 2 of the CCMS is a technical analysis conducted by our Planning Services On-Call consultant, ICF. Michael Grant and Adam Agalico of ICF presented the major findings from the ICF literature review at the June 4th Tech Committee meeting. Today, we're sharing with you the actual report dated July 8th, and the report can be downloaded from the Tech Committee webpage. I'll put the link in the chat box. At 83 pages, the report is quite comprehensive, but there's also a 12-page executive summary that succinctly summarizes the major findings. The next 4 steps for the study are: 1, develop the list of greenhouse gas reduction scenarios to be tested; 2, select the analysis tool for the study; 3, conduct the analysis; and 4, document the findings in a final report that would be due in November or December of this year. Once we have developed the list of scenarios to be tested, we plan to share this with both the Tech Committee and the TPB for their input. Questions or comments on the study can be directed to me, and I'll put my email in the chat box. Thank you.
Great, thanks. One more item, and then we'll open it up for questions. So the last item on our list here is return to office. So I was going to have Leo pull up the memo briefly. The short version of this is there's really nothing new from what you guys what we had talked about last month. So COG staff are currently on 100% choice telework. So we're allowed to come to the office, meaning that the reasonable expectations for safety are in place. But we can choose to stay at home and telework full time until September. And September 1st is when we'll switch to a option to telework up to 3 days a week policy for staff. What that means for our meetings and the building is that we will be inviting our members and the public into the building starting in September. And we had talked with the steering committee last month about what do we want those meetings to look like. And I've had Leo highlight here just a quick sentence from the memo, which is where just highlighting that the sense of the steering committee was that where possible, staff should offer in-person meetings with WebEx and camera in the meeting room as a standard option to all meetings in the board. So what that means, it is a little bit of it's a change from what we've done in the past. In the past, we did have WebEx, but we didn't have camera. We'll be testing new equipment in the COG and in our boardroom and in actually it's travel equipment, so it can go into any of our conference rooms really. We're also looking into some sort of a rent, or not a rent, but like a borrow an iPad kind of situation. So we'll try not to have to print so many materials. And lastly, as you guys will note, we'll be sending out a survey in the next couple of weeks to cover all kinds of questions related to that. And you may find that other COG board, not COG board, but other COG committees, other TPB committees, they're all going to choose to do what works for them. So the camera and meeting room hybrid situation is definitely going to apply for TPB, the steering committee, technical committee, but each of the other smaller committees are going to end up getting to choose what works for them. So I'm going to end with that. But before I go to questions, please feel free to stay on for our steering committee meeting, which will start at 12:15 in 13 minutes. And also, as Jason mentioned, as of right now, if there is an August meeting, again, it will be August 18th. We don't have it on the calendar yet because we don't know if it's even going to happen. The board has to meet on the 21st, and we have to see what plays out there. So I'm sure everyone will stay tuned, but we'll make sure that if we do meet, you guys will have plenty of notice. Jason, back to you for any questions for any of the other business items.
Just a quick comment before I do that. I'm imagining that the COG board meetings will become kind of like The Price is Right, when they zoom to the audience member that gets called up, for being the next contestant. So when we have a member jurisdiction or a member that specifically wants to speak, you have to have the camera quickly turn and zoom in on them and get great audio so that we can all participate no matter where we are. So
I'm not sure if it's going to be that level of camera accessibility, but we'll see what we can do, Jason.
Sure, and I think every in the region facing exactly. I'm sure every jurisdiction in the region is facing the same. Where our board is doing the same thing and trying to figure out how the meetings will work for both in-person folks as well as virtual. So very, very topic of the times. With that, any of the topics from this other business item, can we go to Maryland jurisdictions first? Questions or comments? Okay, not hearing any. Sorry, I'm laughing at some of the comments in the chat. I had to be a smart aleck, and I'm getting it back now. So how about Virginia? Questions or comments? Okay, not hearing any. How about DC? And then finally, WMATA or other modal agencies. Questions or comments? All right, silence is golden. With that, any other final comments from staff before we close the meeting?
Just happy holidays. Have a wonderful summer. I know we'll probably see you all in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I was just going to say stay on for steering committee. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Thanks. And this meeting is adjourned.
Jason, thank you kindly. So maybe you can now go for your breakfast while we go for lunch.
No problem at all.
Well, yeah, I guess you're not missing too much of your vacation because your family's probably just waking up now.
Yeah, they basically got up in the course of the latter part of this meeting, so I think not much was missed. I mean, the beauty of it starting so early is that I didn't really miss much.
So Conti, Jason says Ruben will be here for the steering committee.
Fantastic. I know Ms. Sebeski will have to call in. She is apparently on the road driving to somewhere in Pennsylvania, so she will probably call in. I think Mr. Allen, I'm expecting him to participate. He has been participating. So, John.
Conti?
Yeah. Bob?
Sorry to interrupt. Ask you a question quickly.
Yes, please.
Supervisor Letourneau called me during the meeting, and he evidently is going to be right now on I thought he called a show or radio show, Kogo or something like that, that's locally. Is that something they were going to ask him questions about what we were talking TBB? Because, you know, he thought it was going to be about WMATA because that's what he does, but it may be about, you know, the Maryland, because he's on TPB, and I guess he appears on the show, but it went happen so fast. I couldn't really understand what the show, if this is a radio show that has news on it.
I don't know if you were referring to Kojo Nambi from WAMU in DC.
Yes.
That matches a talk show with some news on it. So I think that is probably where, if he's contacting you by text messages, it might be helpful to just remind him to look at my two recent emails that I sent to the board.
Oh yeah, I gave,
okay.
He has them, and I gave him synopsis and.
Fantastic.
You know, okay. I had 10 minutes to do it all. So
his show is usually 12 to 1, and he usually has a couple. He has like 12 to 12:30 one topic, and then 12:30 to 1 a second topic.
So that's can I get it online?
Yeah, you can listen to
WAMU, of course. You can get WAMU online.
Okay. I usually listen to Apple Radio or something. I'm not familiar with it, so thank you.
It's it's NPR.
And yeah, okay, that I saw. Okay.
Go on NPR. Go ask your speaker. Play NPR. Whatever they call it. Right.
Alexa, play NPR. Okay.
Yeah, essentially, I think it's WAMU.org, and you can stream it to listen to it. And I think Kojo Nambi is only on Fridays now because he retired from full-time show.
Right.
Not that I listen to anything.
Okay, I can listen live.
Your support makes WAMU
Thank you.
possible.
If
Contribute today at
I don't take responsibility for anything he does. Bye. I'll be back.
I understand he just quoted you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. It was nice working with you all.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We'll start the TPB steering committee in just about 6 minutes here. I'm just opening up some documents.
Thank you, Andrew.
For sharing the screen.
Hey, John, are you on? John Swanson?
Yes.
Okay, so at the steering committee, we are going to start off with approval of the 2 TAP program recommendations. For simplicity's sake, particularly, I don't know if there's going to be any discussion that we would want to get into on the Maryland stuff. I'll just recognize you. You can provide a quick background, and then Ariana can go through the slide deck. That work for you?
Sure.
Okay.
We can go through the whole slide deck, though. Ariana should proceed as she did earlier today, right?
Yeah, I would only suggest that maybe we can be a little briefer, in the background and context. I think there is probably going to be a bit of an interest in understanding the July actions on the board and what have you. I mean, we normally set up the meeting for 2 hours, so we do have the time, but I know that in the past, the meetings have generally ended in an hour. So I think we'll just strike that balance. I think providing background information on the recommended projects will be useful because, obviously we are asking them to approve these on the selection committee. So, but we may just want to be selectively brief when we go through the materials. Lynn, we just want to be prepared as we discuss the board agenda, to see if there is any suggestions coming that either why don't we look at the roadway safety programs for approval by the steering committee or what have you. Of course, we're not prepared for it, but we have all of the resolutions and the recommendations because it was ready for the board last month. Let us see how it goes. So just giving you a heads up. And
the roadway safety program doesn't need a resolution. It's just approving the package of projects that they've already seen because we sent it in the director's report. Andrew's got for the WMATA, if we want to approve the WMATA amendment right now, he's got it all ready to go.
And that is we said that would be
a massive amount of money that they're asking to put into the tip, which is why we're
right. So John Sherman, you're online.
Yes, I'm online.
Okay. Would you have the materials ready for the roadway safety? And Andrew, Lynn said that you have all the WMATA amendments ready as well.
That's correct. Yes.
So yes, as long as there isn't a resolution involved, I can just go through the presentation I was planning to do.
Right. So just to be on the safer side, let's keep it ready.
Charles is here.
Oh, okay. Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Allen. How are you?
Good afternoon. How's everyone doing?
Great. We had a good tech committee meeting just wrapping up, and I was recalling some of the feedback we got for the TPB agenda for July in terms of timing. So I was working with Lynn and staff to see if we could be prepared for any additional actions by the steering committee. So,
what gives you that impression that there might be?
I don't know. Just a hunch, I suppose. I think we heard that Mr. Collins will be able to participate, and Ms. Sabisky said that she would have to call in because she's on the road. Okay. So we have provided her with the telephone number. So we have a couple more minutes. We'll track and see if the two officers join us.
Excellent. All right, we'll do. And so as I look through our agenda for today, I know we have like regular orders of business, but then item 3 is when we'll get to kind of talking about the agenda. For the
right. Okay. In a way, while we are waiting for the other two officers, I can just share a little bit of what we were thinking about. Taking a peek at item 3 in the TPB agenda, obviously we've had discussions with the officers in terms of the continuing action by the TPB on approving conformity inputs, and there being 2 potential pathways to continue that activity. One is the amending the June 16th action, and the second one is additional changes to the MDOT projects. We have proposed for the TPB 3 other action items before we get to the conformity inputs. Each of them are 10 minutes each, and one of them is just 5 minutes. And that is where I would appreciate your feedback. We can share the rationale for putting it on the TPB agenda, but if you would rather preserve as much time for the TPB to have an informed discussion about the other topics, the steering committee could act on some of them. First and foremost is WMATA is asking for a significant update to their TIP. Essentially, they are, since their board approved their capital program, they are providing all of the information for the first 2 years of the TIP that is part of their approved budget to be reflected in the TPB's TIP. And that is an important step for them as it will allow them to apply for federal FTA grants to access the money. So normally the steering committee approves amendments, but this is hundreds of millions of dollars. So nothing substantive, nothing controversial, but just given the magnitude of the changes, we had said that the steering committee could review and the TPB act. So we had just 5 minutes. If WMATA representative is here, we have looked at the data, all the amendments. We are able to affirm that these are all programs that are existing programs. So that is something that if you choose the steering committee to act on it, we can pull out that. So that will give us an additional 5 minutes. Another item that is on for 10 minutes is an action item that we had originally proposed for June, but at the steering committee, we decided to bring it back in July. And that is approving the recommended projects to receive the first round of TPB's roadway safety grants. The selection committee has gone through it. The materials were sent to the TPB. There will be a second round of funding in the same calendar year. And the state safety engineers were involved in it. I don't anticipate any issues, or I'm not aware of any outstanding concerns on that. But given that this was the inaugural program on one of the priorities for the TPB, we had proposed having the TPB take the action. So the third action item is approving the enhanced mobility supplemental grants for the pandemic relief from ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act. That the selection has not been completely endorsed by the officers of the selection committee. So it's not really ready for today's approval. That might be one that we will want to take it to the board. And there again, I don't think it will need a lot of time. So those are the three things. I would appreciate your feedback.
Well, I think we can't let the regular and necessary business of TPB also get too sidelined by what we know will be a pretty big debate, or at least what we expect will likely be a big debate again on the 21st. So I think if you're talking about items that are kind of in that 5 to 10 minute range, like I don't want us, especially if we're going to end up with the route of having an August special meeting that would likely be very narrow in focus. We probably can't keep punting items, right? So I think that I want to make sure we don't delay just the necessary and required business. So I think it makes sense for them on the agenda. If you think they're kind of 5 minutes or so, probably not controversial. There may be a couple of questions people ask, but that's about it. I would say let's keep those on the agenda at the meeting. Also, maybe helps us feel like we've accomplished something by being able to have a couple of votes that everyone's on the same page with before we get to the bigger items.
Okay, thank you. That helps. In fact, it is with that thinking the first item of the steering committee today. And Lynn, do we have the other two officers? We can get started if they're not.
Might as well we have enough members, so
okay.
We have a quorum, so.
Okay, so Mr. Allen, I'll turn over the meeting to you. The first item on the agenda is normally something we would have taken to the TPB. This is approving the Transportation Alternative Program funds for both DC and Maryland. And this is an ongoing program. This is not a new program. So, and this normally would have taken 15-20 minutes. So we figured that might be one that the steering committee can act, but it can be reported out to the full board and the materials made available to the TPB. So that's the first item. So I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that makes sense to me, Conti, what you're describing. So what do you need me to do here? Do you want me to turn to have?
Yeah, I can get staff
walk us through that.
Yeah. So John and Ariana will review the program and the recommendations. There are two separate program approvals here, one for the District of Columbia, one for Maryland. So John?
Thanks, Conti, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this is a This is one of the few responsibilities for direct funding that the TPB as an MPO has responsibility for. So it's kind of an exciting thing. It also gives us a chance to really implement some of the ideas, the policies, and some of the planning work actually that we've already funded through the TLC program. So these are capital improvement program projects. These are sort of moving design toward implementation in some cases. So it's an exciting package of program projects. Close to $4 million. And it's a federal grant program, as I mentioned already. Last year, we were undersubscribed, unfortunately, likely due to the pandemic, for both Maryland and DC. That was a big disappointment. And, you know, we heard really clear indications from the board members, from everyone, that we needed to try to not make sure that didn't happen again. So we really beat the drum this year, got a lot of applications, which is, you know, good news. In some cases, it's the bad news because there's some really great projects that are going to go unfunded. But I think we're really excited about this package of projects. It's really building on a lot of our priorities and previous work. So I'm going to turn it over to Ariana to, you know, briefly set it up, but really describe some of the projects in some detail for both Maryland and then separately for DC. Ariana.
Hello, everyone. Some of you may have heard from me earlier today. My name is Ariana Kadunis, and I'm a regional planner here at COG. I'm going to be sharing the TAP selection panel's recommendation for the Transportation Alternative Set-Aside Program, otherwise known as TAP, for both Maryland and the District of Columbia. I'll begin my presentation by describing the TAP program and COG TPB's role in the TAP selection process, including the evaluation of our regional priorities criteria. I'll then drill down into the schedule and project recommendation details for both Maryland and District of Columbia. And at the conclusion of this presentation, you as the steering committee will be voting on the two resolutions for these projects. So some brief background, as most of you should be aware, in 2012, under MAP 21, the Transportation Alternatives Program was formed and then renamed under the FAST Act as Transportation Alternatives Set Aside. Our role at TPB is to utilize these suballocated funds to create projects that are in line with our priorities here within the region, and which are alternatives to traditional highway construction. Next slide. So this selection process consists of independent project review by selection panels that represent COG TPB staff and the appropriate DOT representatives. So for Maryland, we had representatives from VDOT and DDOT, as well as COG, with individuals from MDOT serving as technical resources, and the same was true for DC, with DDOT serving as those resources. These panels, respectively, for Maryland and DC, met on June 30th and July 7th after individual reviews of these projects were scored, and then the panels reached consensus to select the projects. Next slide. These are our regional policies criteria. So out of the 110 possible points, 60 of them come from these 7 categories. Next slide. This is the schedule for Maryland, with the last bullet being what we're doing right now. Next slide. And these are the recommendations for the Maryland project. So we had a little over $2.9 million available. MDOT received 10 eligible applications representing over $13.2 million in requested funding. Our recommendation is for 6 of those projects for a total of $2,688,501, with $242,170 remaining. Next slide. The 6 recommended projects will serve many of TPB's regional key policies. 5 of the projects are in activity centers. And the 2 largest projects, which are Greenbelt and Oxen Cove, account for 77% of the total suballocation. Both of these projects are located in equity emphasis areas. 3 of the projects improve access to transit, and one of these, which is Greenbelt, is a transit access focus area for improving walk-bike access to transit. All 6 projects support the National Capital Trail Network. 2 of the projects, which are New Design Road and Greenbelt, are for unbuilt segments of the National Capital Trail Network, One project will fund rehabilitation of an existing segment, which is Oxen Cove, and all remaining projects will support access to the network. The three largest projects, which are Greenbelt, Oxen Cove, and New Design Road, build upon planning studies that were previously funded by the TPB's Transportation Land Use TLC program. And I know that we want to keep things rolling, but I was also instructed to make sure we're focusing on the project. So I'm just gonna, unless, let me know, Conti, if you'd rather I move on, I can just give a brief sentence to give a little more detail to each of these projects. So I'll keep going unless I'm told not to. So for the first project listed, the ADA crosswalk at Lerner in Maryland, this will design an ADA pedestrian walkway and increase access to a segment of the National Capital Trail along Maryland 197. For the Greenbelt Metro Station Hiker Biker Trail, this will construct a multi-use trail to connect and expand multimodal opportunities at the Greenbelt Metro Station, which is a transit access focus area.
Can you start the conference bridge?
Sorry, what was that, Conti?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay. For Maryland 187 and Cordell Avenue pedestrian safety improvements, this is currently a dangerous intersection, Bethesda. This will receive funding to design geometric and ped beacon safety improvements to increase pedestrian safety and also help achieve the state and county Vision Zero goals. Similarly, the next project, Maryland 188 Wilson Lane and Cordell Avenue, also has those Vision Zero goals in mind. And this is a safe routes to school project, which will construct pedestrian access improvements to Bethesda Elementary School. New Design Road is a 2.5-mile key segment of the National Capital Trail Network. It will undergo 100% design funding with this grant and will be ready to move toward implementation following the completion of this project. It's the first of 3 phases that will eventually, when completed, tie Frederick City with the C&O Canal National Park. And finally, Oxen Cove Trail resurfacing and bridge replacement includes resurfacing and rehabilitating 1 mile of Oxen Cove Trail and replacing a pedestrian bridge that was destroyed by flooding in 2015. This also builds upon recommendations from a previous TLC study. Next slide. This is the schedule for the District of Columbia, which I will now describe that TAP process. Next slide. So this year for DC, we had $1,030,989 available for the regional suballocation. 4 projects were received by DDOT, totaling exactly that amount. And the selection panel recommends full funding for these 4 projects with $0 remaining. Next slide. These projects recommended are highly consistent with regional priorities. All 4 of them are in activity centers, all are in equity emphasis areas, and all are close to high capacity transit. The Capitol Crescent Trail is a vital link in the National Capital Trail Network. Next slide. Or rather, sorry, you can stay on this slide. So going into each project with a little more detail, 11th Street Northwest safety improvements will improve bicycle infrastructure in and adjacent to existing facilities, as well as incorporate pedestrian improvements through shortened crossings and improved visibility. The permanent curb extension study will use DDOT's existing inventory of tactical installations and develop a methodology for identifying locations for upgrades to potentially make permanent changes. It will then take 20 of these locations to a concept design that will be ready to move toward permanent improvements. The Capitol Crescent Trail Rehabilitation Phase 1 Planning and Design is the first step in a 2-phase project to fully rehabilitate all 3.7 miles of the Capitol Crescent Trail in DC, which is heavily used. Phase 1 is for design, planning, and environmental compliance. And finally, Washington Union Station restoration in East Hall is the project's goal is to clean, repaint, and conserve historic decorative finishes on the upper walls above the pilasters and the ceiling. Next slide. So please note that instead of saying COG TPB staff recommend, this should say the TAP selection panel recommends. The Maryland and DC TAP projects be fully funded as per the following resolutions: for Maryland SR 1 2022 and for the District of Columbia SR 2 2022. And details on those resolutions should be included in the mail out. So next slide. This concludes my presentation. Thanks for your time. I will now leave the floor open for my colleague John Swanson to make any additional remarks, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
That's fine. I think I've made my remarks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ariana.
Sounds good.
Thank you,
Thanks, Ariana. All right, so Conti, real fast. So your recommendation again was that you want the steering committee to approve those resolutions, and then essentially at the meeting, we'll just kind of report out.
Exactly. And one of the standing features of the board is all actions of the steering committee are reviewed and concurred by the TPB. So we will make sure to include this packet with a cover memo explaining what had been done and highlight the projects as if this would all have been done for the board.
Got it. All right, so I guess let me turn to see if there are any questions. First, I had one quick one, Ariana. So the district put forward 4 proposals that nailed it, got down to like 10, right? So like every dollar is used. And I think on the Maryland list, there was about, was it maybe 20,000 that was left over? So I guess the question I would have is what happens to that additional 20,000, or is there a project that should have could they revise their budget if they were able to take advantage of that additional funding? Like are we just going to lose that money or leave it on the table, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. And just to clarify the numbers for Maryland, it's actually $242,170.
200. Okay, I missed a zero.
So,
right.
so not insignificant.
Right.
And in the past, this money that remains will then carry over to the following year.
Okay.
We are in conversation with MDOT right now to finalize the changes that are in effect starting this year, but this year those funds will instead roll over into Maryland statewide funds, and those will be allocated to projects within, that includes projects within the Washington metropolitan area. And so when we determined which of the 6 projects we recommended, we were asked as the selection panel to recommend 2 projects that we would like to see given high prioritization within that pot. And this is, just a recent discussion we've had. So if John Swanson or anyone else would like to add further detail, or any representatives who are here from MDOT, including Carrie Snyder, please feel free.
That's all true. Each of the states there's a MPO pot of funding for TAP, and there's a statewide pot of funding for TAP. And so we select the projects. For DC, actually, it's 50-50. There's MPO and the DC funds all go to Safe Routes to School projects. So it's a sort of a totally separate program. For Maryland, the Maryland a committee at MDOT will consider the unfunded applications that have been received statewide, including the unfunded applications from our region. And there are a few of those, and those will be given consideration. And as Ariana mentioned, the MDOT has asked us to indicate which would be our priorities for funding using our surplus.
Okay. So short version is dollars are not going to they're not going to go to waste. They're not left on the table, whether it be a rollover or reallocation to other projects within Maryland, those dollars will go there. Okay. And then I have one other quick question on the DC projects. I don't know if maybe Mark is on the call and can answer, but Ariana, I don't know if you can slide back to that list. The one that I was curious about, just making sure I understand, the conversion of the DC. There we go. The permanent curb extension study, Mark, is the idea behind that one, because DDOT has done a lot of different pilots around how to do different curb extensions with flex posts and paints. The idea to study how to convert that into either a permanent curb, literally as it says, or other work. And then have you also, I think I heard you say you've identified 20 intersections, or you're going to plan to do it. Have you already identified which ones those are?
As far as I'm aware, the study will include zeroing in on those 20 locations. And everything else you said is accurate as far as I understand it for that project.
This is Mark. I am here, Councilmember Allen, and Leslie.
Hey, Mark.
DDOT is also on the phone. Leslie, are you able to add to Ariana's response?
Hey, Mark, thank you. Thank you, Ariana. I don't know additional information about the project, unfortunately. Sorry.
Okay. All right, got it. I guess one question I have, and we can certainly follow up afterwards, is like, have we identified those 20, or is the idea that we're studying all of our pilot areas to then zero in on what the 20 should be?
What I'm understanding is that the study will identify those 20, and for those 20, they'll identify 30% concept plans, which could essentially move toward a more permanent solution. There may be additional work that's needed, but to some degree, the prioritization is based upon need, but also sort of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's developing a methodology for identifying locations for upgrades, and then for purposes of the study, zeroing in on 20 of those locations that are identified.
Well, to my good friends at DDOT, I'll certainly say Ward 6 has been a wonderful place to pilot so many of these curb extensions. So, you know, in whatever way that those 20 look a lot like they're in Ward 6, or, you know, you'll get my full support of that. So sounds great. All right. Does anybody have any other questions?